Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
I hope you're ready. After all, today we are going to plunge into the world of tropical jungle wildlife and the home of some of the most dangerous animals on the planet, announced the guide and left the stage. The music played again on deck, and all the passengers went about their business. There was an hour left until arrival at the pier. Some were already on a low start and waiting at the exit from the ship. Some were still having fun and humming their champagne. There were also those who were cutting themselves into cards the whole way, not paying attention to everything else. There were a lot of different people here. They were all on their way to West Africa on the coast of tropical Cameroon. But there was one thing that united all these very different passengers. They all wanted to capture the beauty of the tropical jungle and show off to their friends as soon as possible about what a mysterious and beautiful place they had traveled to. Jacob stood on the bow of the ship and watched how fast this vessel was approaching the pretty coastline. He was a photographer. This occupation was by no means his official job. However, he enjoyed photography very much. He came from Poland and wanted to add some exoticism to his boring life. He worked in a stuffy office, an ordinary manager, but always dreamed of turning his hobby into a real job, bringing good income. The guy often arranged photo shoots for a low price, attracting clients. He was also at different celebrations, weddings, birthdays, graduations, and even funerals. For him, photography was a kind of magic, the ability to stop time in moments to capture. He felt almost like God. Those happy or, on the contrary, sad faces remained forever on the film of his camera. Not many colleagues, friends, and acquaintances were ready to appreciate his hobby. Many times he heard such phrases as, "Oh, what's so hard to click, and that's it. I do not understand why you take money." But Jacob did not give up. He knew that someday he would become a very famous photographer. All he had to do was try. After all, it's not just a click of the camera. You had to find the right lighting angle. And of course, the skill of dexterity had to be present too. Otherwise, how can you capture the laughter of a child who only cries all the time or the moments of real happiness? When a girl finally gets married, each moment must be able to capture, and this is a skill few people have. Jacob was sure of his success, so he went on this cruise, having saved part of the necessary amount of money by hard office labor. It is here in the rainforest. Their boundless ocean could make gorgeous shots that would immediately make him famous. So he thought, so dreamed. Finally, the ship came to develop towards the shore. Most of the guests watched the action with admiration, and some did not care. Sometimes the question was why people with such sour faces went on this trip. Although the answer was obvious, they were just tired. After all, the liner had traveled to this place for many days and nights. And even though there were all the amenities, huge swimming pools, restaurants, large cabins, many passengers were really suffering from not being able to set foot on solid land. They could have taken an airplane. But this particular unforgettable excursion involved traveling on a liner. The tour company was highly publicized and attracted the attention of many people. Everyone wanted to see the beauty of the tropical jungle and, of course, to ride on a real ocean liner. They arrived at a place called Buda. There were many hotels by the sea. This is where the tourists were supposed to check in. A wide gangway was fed to the exit. People immediately rushed to get down on solid ground. And in a minute a traffic jam was formed. Jacob was in no hurry to get off, so he did not even enter the crowd. He preferred to enjoy the seascape for a few more minutes. He thought about how endless this ocean is, and how small he was in this boundless expanse. He was brought out of his thoughts by a man's voice behind Sir. "It's time to go," the sailor said. Jacob nodded and followed the man. He understood their language, but he could not speak it himself. He even tried to learn the language once. He signed up for courses, went, but then his work came up. And after a month, he didn't even remember to study. Now, even though he knew a couple dozen basic words in the language, it was impossible to speak it, of course. But the very speech of foreigners was understandable to him, though with some difficulty. Stepping down the gangway, he immediately smelled the aroma of some delicious spices. Jacob even closed his eyes for a moment to better feel this magical smell. When he opened them, he realized where this wonderful aroma was coming from. There were vendors standing on the wharf and beckoning tourists, showing them sacks of different spices. Jacob risked approaching one of the stalls. The guy tried to ask what kind of spices are these? The natives looked at him with a silly smile and blinked. He didn't understand anything. Jacob, pointing to the bag of spices. After a while, the guy replied, finally realizing what the customer wanted from him. Jacob continued, and only then realized he was speaking English again. The kid merchant was upset, because again did not understand a word. He tried to say something to Jacob, but he was already looking the other way. He was being called out to everyone else by a woman from his tour group. All right, the hell with you. Disgruntled Jacob skipped away and ran to his own. You will now get into these cars and you will be taken to the hotel. There you will leave your things, explained the young girl tour guide. She was wearing long shorts, khaki color, and a white top. Jacob even got a little embarrassed when the girl looked at him with a smile. Jacob, why are you standing there? You do not understand something? Asked the guide, approaching thoughtfully that guy. He woke up and blushed even more. I do not. Excuse me, where are the cars? Asked Jacob, embarrassed. The girl laughed and pointed to the side. A lot of big black SUVs were parked there. The boy nodded and ran toward them. The tourists drove through the jungle to the Marion Beach Hotel. The journey took about 20 minutes by car. While they were moving, Jacob and all the other guests admired the beauty of this rainforest. Of course, it couldn't be called untouched nature, as it was a jungle with hotels. And of course, the territory was put in order. Large animals could not be met here. But it was possible to observe interesting and exotic plants, which seemed quite ordinary to the locals. After a few minutes, the tourists finally arrived at the place, which will now be their home for 2 weeks. Jacob was taken away by the hotel staff, and he followed them along the way, observing the gorgeous landscape. The owners of this hotel had done a great job. Now Jacob understood why he had paid so much money. Although in fact, half of the cost of this excursion was paid by his parents, thus making him a birthday present. They always supported him in his endeavors. And for that, the son was very grateful to them. His parents were not particularly rich, but they saved up for this trip for a long time, so that the surprise for their son turned out to be really worthy. The grounds of the hotel were huge. There were wooden bridges that led to the rooms. The villas were built right on the water. There were palm trees, colorful flowers, and bushes planted everywhere. But of course, what struck Jacob the most was the view from the room window. It overlooked the vast ocean. The doorman put Jacob's things by the door and handed him the keys and walked out, leaving the guy alone. Jacob was ecstatic. The first thing he did was jump on their tea bed and enjoyed the stunning ocean view out the window for a long time. After a few minutes, the hotel manager knocked on his room and in English asked him to go to the restaurant where the girl tour guide was already waiting for everyone. Now the guy experienced some excitement in his chest again. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down. True, it didn't help much. He liked this girl very much and wanted to make the best impression on her, so he searched his suitcase for something beautiful. However, everything that could at least a little bit suitable for the first acquaintance there was. A black jacket and pants. Of course, Jacob wouldn't put them on. He would have looked like a white crow. It was only morning, however, it was already very hot. So the guy opted for beach shorts and a shirt with palm trees. He fiddled with the mirror for a long time, and when he looked at his watch, he immediately perked up. He was already very late. So, taking only his cell phone with him, he rushed to the restaurant. The way was not long, and Jacob did not even get confused in the turns. Whether it was luck or he was just well oriented by the signs, but he got to the meeting place almost on time. There were already 20 people seated in the restaurant. However, it was not all of them. Probably all of them were divided into groups, and Jacob almost jumped with happiness when he realized that this girl would be a tour guide in his group. Oh, Jacob, we've been waiting for you. The girl standing on the dais greeted him with a smile. All the guests immediately turned to him, and the guy felt embarrassed again. "Please have a seat in a friendly manner," the girl said and turned to the other guests again. "So my name is Anna, and I will be your guide for the rest of our journey for all questions. Please feel free to contact me." She turned her head and winked at Jacob. The man immediately blushed, but did his best to hide it. He didn't understand why Anna was paying such attention to him. Of course, Jacob secretly hoped that something caught her eye. "Tomorrow we go to the jungle, so please dress as comfortable as possible. Everything else will be taken care of by our team," continued the guide. "And today, rest up, gain strength for our journey." Some of the guests still asked some questions, and then everyone began to disperse. Jacob was brave enough and approached Anna. He wanted to invite her to dinner at the restaurant, but something went wrong, and the guy stuttered at the first word. The girl obviously noticed this strange behavior and decided to take the initiative. "Did you want to ask me something? Friendly?" she asked. Jacob looked at her beautiful eyes and could not tear his gaze away. They were similar, like the sky or the ocean, which was a few hundred meters away from them. And Jacob wanted to swim in those eyes forever. "Jacob, are you all right already?" asked Anna. Jacob, as if struck by lightning. He woke up from that pleasant trance. "Sorry," he mumbled. "You wanted to know something?" The girl asked again. Jacob was about to offer her dinner at the restaurant, but at the last moment changed my mind. Usually girls do not like such a persistent guy, and they'd only known each other for an hour. It was urgent to think of something, and Jacob did not think of a more ingenious idea than to ask where is the bathroom. Anna looked at him in bewilderment, but tried not to show it. She pointed in the direction of the restroom, and when Jacob went there, the girl laughed softly. It was evening. Jacob has already had time to sunbathe in the sun, drink cocktails, and swim in the sea. After arriving, he was very tired, but decided to take a last look at the restaurant. His favorite song was playing there, and he really wanted to go there. Inviting Anna to the restaurant was a very good option. But Jacob decided first to get to know her better. "May I, please?" I put, and. "I think that's it. I don't like to eat when it's hot," said Jacob in English. He had practiced for a long time during the day to make this order. The waiter nodded understandingly and left. The guy looked around and immediately noticed Anna. She was sitting across the table from him and seemed to notice him. "Do you speak the language well here?" she said, smiling. The girl was drinking something from a glass. It looked like white wine. "Thank you. I tried," Jacob answered proudly. He felt like a schoolboy who was praised for a good grade. Suddenly, Anna stood up and walked over to his table. "Do you mind if I sit down?" she asked politely, standing at the table with a glass of wine. Jacob again admired the girl's clothes. The white, open dress suited her very well. "Yes, of course," smiled the guy. The girl pushed back her chair and sat down across from him. Now Jacob was again embarrassed by the gaze of this beautiful young girl. "I'm very excited to be leading the tour here. I've been to a lot of places, but I've never led a tour in Africa," shared Anna. "Do you work as a photographer?" she asked, pointing at the camera that hung on his chest. "So far only part-time," embarrassed Jacob. "And how long have you been working as a tour guide?" But Anna did not have time to answer, as on her shoulder was a heavy muscular hand of some man. The girl turned around and fake aghast, showing her delight and admiration. Jacob didn't realize what kind of scene was unfolding in front of him. But then the guy realized that all his hopes to make Anna his girlfriend collapsed, because she kissed the jock on the lips. Jacob was even embarrassed by this awkward situation. After all, he thought she was flirting with him. Finally, Anna pulled away from her boyfriend and turned to Jacob. "Jacob, meet my husband Jim." The girl introduced her man. Jacob simply responded with a handshake. From his look, you could immediately understand that he was not happy with the situation. He always had bad luck with girls, and unfortunately, Anna was no exception. "Jim is one of the tourists in my group, Jacob," explained the girl to her husband. Jim only smiled strained. He also did not like that his wife sat at the table to some little familiar guy. Jacob noticed this look and hurried away under the pretext that he was very tired today. Anna once again reminded him about what time they were going to meet tomorrow, and the guy left. Bitter annoyance tormented him for the rest of the night. However, at the end, he accepted the fact that the beautiful Anna would never be his other half. He was able to fall asleep only in the morning and slept only 4 hours. At 8 o'clock, everyone was already standing outside the hotel waiting for their guide. Today, they were to go into the jungle. It was frightening and very exciting at the same time. Jacob took with him only a camera, but just in case he grabbed a lighter and a couple of paper napkins. This climate was very bad for him. Therefore, it was not impossible that he would get a runny nose. Finally, Anna came out of the hotel accompanied by 3 tall, muscular men. They were carrying many small boxes. "Greetings, ladies and gentlemen," the girl announced solemnly, approaching the group. "At last we will begin our journey. But before we go into the forest, full of dangers, we need to take the necessary equipment, as well as sign some documents." All 3 men put the boxes on the floor. One of them opened the package and took out something dirty green. Anna walked over to them and decided to comment on the contents. "So each of you will be given a special suit that will be comfortable for walking. It has special pockets for water matches, insect right, and much more. So bravely take these things on the dare, and we will go on our hike." Several people immediately ran up to the men and a line formed. All the while Jacob stood waiting for his suit, he looked at Anna, who was explaining something to one of the hikers. Jacob was still mortified. This was not his girlfriend and never would be. "Dear, don't hold up the line, please," asked the man, handing the guy things from the box. Jacob grudgingly took the gear and stepped aside to put it all on himself. Slowly, he got into the suit, putting water and the rest of the items in it. He was surprised to see a clerical knife among the gear. Why would he need it in the jungle? However, Jacob decided not to ask unnecessary questions. "Those who have received all the necessary items, come to me," Anna announced. Jacob looked in her direction. The girl stood at a table and gave each person a form. Jacob decided to find out what was written on the forms. He got in line and after a while finally came to the table. "Familiarize yourself with the document and then sign here and here," the girl explained. "It's all formalities." She tried to say friendly, but it turned out too serious, and Jacob tensed. He stepped aside to read the contract. "In case of injury, or death, I have no claims against the organizers. I am familiar with the safety rules," it said in the contract. The guy was not surprised by this paragraph. As other tourists, he often participated in sports competitions. And everywhere in all the papers there was the same warning. It was really just a formality. However, it was still a bit tense. After all, anything could happen in the jungle. But he trusted this tour company, which in its entire existence had never had any such incidents. Well, or did they just keep quiet about them? Suddenly, a red-hot thought occurred to him. Jacob approached Anna again and jabbed his pen at one of the items. "Did we talk about safety rules?" Jacob asked. He didn't care at all. He knew it was a formality. He just wanted to hear her voice one more time. The girl looked at him skeptically and then answered with a strained smile. "I will announce all the rules later." "No worries," Jacob nodded and handed over the signed contract. A few minutes later, all the documents were signed and Anna spoke again. "And so it's perfect. Now I've instructed you all, and we'll be on our way." Everyone moved as close to her as possible, like they were afraid of not hearing something. The jungle is not something you drive through. When we drove to the hotel, the girl started. "Now we are going to a truly untouched nature, the wild animal house. In this regard, I want you to make sure once again that you have all the equipment. Please keep up with the group and help each other out, if anyone needs help. And now for the most important part. I'm going to ask you all to hand in your cell phones." There was an immediate uproar after this statement. However, after a minute, Anna managed to calm everyone down and continued that all this is done for you in the jungle. Communication does not catch, so phones will be to you no need. If you wanted to take pictures, then I hasten to rejoice you. With us will go a professional photographer. At first, Jacob thought that the girl was talking about him, so he felt some pride and at the same time embarrassment. However, after these emotions came disappointment, when from behind Anna came Jim with a camera. Jim will take quality pictures of you for free. Will you be satisfied? Satisfied, announced the girl. The tourists immediately calmed down and changed their minds. All of them gladly put their gadgets in special boxes. We are responsible for your electronics, so you cannot worry. She safely laughed Anna. And now let's get to the most important thing. She switched to a serious tone. Sometimes there are situations where you may get lost, but don't worry. Each of you will now be issued trackers. On them there is a special red button, pressing which you will immediately call the rescuers. The men who were holding the boxes started handing out the trackers. Jacob looked at the flimsy device with disbelief. It was definitely not protected from any exposure to water, so he had to be careful with it. When everyone had checked the equipment for the 1000th time, the campers settled into the SUVs that were taking them into the thick of it. They drove through beautiful terrain again, past other hotels. Anna was narrating their itinerary. So, she said, "First of all, we will go to see the waterfall. It is the most mesmerizing and magical place where we will be able to take amazing pictures and, of course, make a wish." After 10 minutes, the tourists were dropped off right on the road. To the right, there was already trampled path along it. Apparently, 1,000 tourists passed by. After all, it was the most famous place of the Step Waterfall, very impressive show. For about 10 minutes, the group was going up the mountain and finally got to the right place. Jacob immediately ran to take his stunning shots, tried to choose the best location, but everyone was already crowded around, and it was impossible to get a good spot. Jim had already started taking pictures of everyone, and there was a crowd around him too. Jacob was very angry, but he still managed to find a secluded place from which he could see the waterfall very well. The guy took a few shots and was about to leave, when suddenly someone's hand touched his shoulder. He turned around in fright and saw a low Yaroslav man. Standing next to him was an equally small girl. "Is that your camera?" asked the man, pointing to the object in Jacob's hands. "Yes, mine," answered the frightened boy. "I'll take a picture of me and the girl, because this Jim is already all over the place." "I'm not a tourist photographer," indifferently replied Jacob, and was going to pass by. The men moved to the main group, but the tourist blocked his way. And at that moment, Jacob tripped on a rock and fell to the ground. To him, frightened girl ran up to him and tried to help him get up. Jacob unhappily got up from the lunatic and looked around. He dropped a bottle of water, which he opened and got angry. Picking it up, he looked around himself. His palms were muddy, his sleeves were muddy too. "What have you done?" shrieked Jacob at the pair. The girl looked at him fearfully, and the man pressed his lips together guiltily. "I'm sorry," the boy gave the man's voice. "What do I need your apology for?" The boy continued his indignation with quick steps, full of just indignation. He sprinted downstairs, where a group of him was already gathering, spotted by Anna. "Uo," she pronounced, looking at Jacob. "You're all right." "Yes, much better," sarcastically replied Jacob. The girl looked away embarrassed and continued talking to the group. "Well, everyone is gathered, which means we can go to the jungle. On the way I will tell you about the beauty of these wonderful forests. But remember, there are a lot of wild animals here, so keep the taser in your pockets with you, okay?" Well, we're off. The tourists followed the guide, and Jacob was still turning away from the mud. Having calmed down a little, he began to catch up with the group. Before he knew it, he had caught up with the guide. "So, and here we will stop, and you can take pictures," she announced to the group, and then turned her head towards Jacob, who was no longer eager to take pictures. The boy just sat down on the nearest rock. They weren't in the thicket of the jungle yet. From here, they could still only see the waterfall now. And looking at the terrain, Jacob realized that he had sat down under a tree that was icy. Though there were similar plants everywhere here, the group once again flanked Jim, and he quickly clicked the shutter of his camera. What did Anna see in him? He was even holding the camera unprofessionally. Jacob was very indignant at this fact. Suddenly sat down to him the one he was just thinking about. "How are you?" Quietly, she asked, looking directly at him. Jacob turned his head and examined the girl. That hiking suit suited her very well, but as soon as the guy remembered her husband Jim, immediately gloomed. "It's okay," he indifferently replied, turning his head away. He looked like a hurt boy, and he realized it himself. "I was told you fell." Concerned, inquired Anna. "Yes, I fell." In the same cold tone, the boy answered. "I don't think your mood was ruined because of that." "What else could it be?" The boy muttered. The girl was silent, but Jacob knew the answer to that question. His mood had been ruined yesterday when he saw Anna's shoulder being touched. That muscular arm. Jacob had always been a very lovesick person and took any blows of fate hard. He had no experience in relationships. Girls always bypassed him. But the reason was definitely not in his appearance. The guy was quite handsome, athletic, and young. He was just too nerdy. He didn't think he was better than anyone else, but he often allowed himself to correct those whose assertion was clearly wrong. Or maybe the reason revealed itself in the fact that he was still living with his parents, though at 22 that wasn't such a shameful thing to do. Either way, whatever the real reason was, girls were still avoiding him. The group was already starting to gather again. Anna got up from the rock and walked towards them. Jacob pulled himself together and followed her. "So what you saw was still a flower. And now we are heading into the real jungle. Please be vigilant and do not defend," explained the girl guide. People followed the guide, Jacob along with them. The road was not an easy one. The path was very often very narrow and slippery. Sometimes you had to step over thick roots of plants. There were vines hanging from every step. In just a few minutes, they were able to see the first real creatures of wildlife, the monkey. Not all the tourists had time to see this monkey, because it jumped lightning fast through the trees and instantly flew over their heads. Some were upset. However, Anya assured them that this was not the purpose of their hike today. After all, they were now going to an area where tigers lived. Unfortunately, it really took a long time to get to them. But the girl guide entertained her group with the most interesting facts about the jungle. Therefore, the tourists were not so boring to wade through the thickets. Once again climbed over a fallen tree. Jacob noticed some movement. He looked around, but saw no one. But then, looking closer, he noticed the tail of a parrot, and then his own. He was sitting on a tree branch and brushing his feathers. Jacob decided not to shout to everyone about what he saw, otherwise people would scare away the cautious bird. Instead, the guy decided to take a few shots on his camera. The group walked slowly. He would definitely not lag behind. Jacob carefully, without sudden movements, took out the camera and began to look for a good angle. But he could not get it. Then the parrot hid his head behind a wing or turned around. So it was not clear what kind of bird it was. But after several unsuccessful attempts to shoot this wonderful creature, Jacob still managed to find a good position. And as soon as he clicked, the parrot immediately flew aside on another branch. The shot turned out blurry and incomprehensible, but stubborn Jacob could not allow this bird to remain unrecorded. He'd be biting his elbows for the rest of his life. So the guy approached his victim again. It flew in again. Jacob chased it again and again, and he finally got a really amazing shot. It very successfully captured the parrot in all its glory. Especially well turned out wings. If you zoom in on them, you could see them in great detail. Jacob for a minute admired this masterpiece, and then with a happy face decided to return to the line. But when he went in the direction he thought he had just come from, Jacob realized that this was definitely not where he had been and turned around in the opposite direction. Now he was confused and didn't know where to go. Any path made him doubtful. He decided to orient himself by the branches, because they were the ones he was looking at when he was chasing the parrot. Because of his excitement, he began to be overcome by heavy doubts. However, Jacob decided to listen to his intuition and went in the right direction, in his opinion. He walked for about 10 minutes, but never came to a familiar path. The guy began to get more and more worried. He began to calm himself. Maybe he simply missed the path where he should have turned. Jacob turned back, began to look, but through the huge leaves of liana plants and trees, could not make out anything at all. Suddenly, he heard some kind of hissing. He was terribly alarmed. Jacob slowly turned his head, and his soul took to its heels. On a branch of a tree that was a couple of meters away, from it sat a snake, a huge snake, and it was also completely different from what he had seen once in his native forest. Jacob froze. He had read many times that when you see a snake, you should just stop and let it go, which he did. Sweat slowly dripped from his face, but not a single muscle trembled. The snake, on the other hand, hesitated for a couple minutes, and then descended from the branches to the ground and crawled past the guy with a sing-song. Jacob waited a few more minutes motionless, to be sure not to run into this deadly creature. Then he exhaled a sigh of relief, but unfortunately, being saved from the snake didn't solve his even bigger problems. He was still alone in the dense jungle, and it was still unclear where he was. Jacob walked a few more meters and came to a small clearing. It was very cozy here, if you ignore the fact that he was completely lost. The sun shone cheerfully through the crowns of trees, and its slanting golden rays fell on the emerald-thick grass. In the distance, Jacob saw a monkey deftly jumping from one liana to another, but he was no longer impressed by this sight. He panicked. His heart beat more often, his hands were sweating. Suddenly, he remembered Anna's words. Everyone will have a tracker. Press the red button, and the rescuers will come for you. The boy looked at his wrist and could not believe his eyes. The life-saving bracelet was gone. On the other hand, it was not there either. Jacob frantically searched for something in his pockets and backpack. The search was unsuccessful. Tracker was nowhere to be found. It was only after a few minutes that Jacob had an epiphany when he tripped and fell. It wasn't just water he dropped. The GPS tracker fell off my arm too. Jacob didn't even notice. Now he was left completely alone without food, water, and without the ability to call rescuers. The guy sat down on a rock and almost cried. Soon, and the day would be coming to an end. He thought, it gets dark quickly in the jungle. And indeed, the sunset was slowly drifting away. To help, Amir yelled as hard as I could. Boy. He screamed again and again until he was completely hoarse. But no matter how many times he tried, there was nothing and no one. Then he had the horrifying, but perhaps fictitious, idea of making a fire. The smoke was bound to be seen by someone. He had often seen on the news how people were found thanks to the smoke from the fire. So Jacob decided to repeat the experience. He found some dry branches lying near the trees. 10 minutes later, he himself took a whole pile. Now it was only necessary to set it on fire. Jacob found a lighter in the pocket of his jacket and brought it to the twigs. The twig lit up nicely and immediately went out. This was the first time Jacob had encountered such a problem. And finally, he realized. It was all caused by the immense humidity. The kindling here wasn't so dry, and it didn't burn well. So Jacob found some dry leaves and put them under the branches, took out a lighter and lit the leaves. A small flame engulfed the dry leaves and then spread to the branches. At first, Jacob was pleased with what he had done. However, then his luck turned away from him. When the fire had gotten hot enough, the flames suddenly spread to nearby branches and dry grass. The fire began to climb toward the larger trees. Jacob now looked on in horror as the kindling and fire was almost reaching the dense thicket. Disaster was inevitable. The guy tried to put out the flames with his jacket, but nothing helped. He began to have the most real panic. His palms were sweating. Cold sweat appeared on his body. His eyes darkened and it became difficult to breathe. His throat constricted. Just a moment more. He'd just burned to death in here, in this damn jungle. Suddenly, he heard the distinct cracking of branches behind him, under someone's heavy footsteps. Jacob turned around, hoping that he had been found. But the sight he saw frightened him even more than the fire. He recoiled and almost fell into the fire. There was a gorilla staring back at him. The animal seemed so huge. The boy just stood still. It was as if he was burrowed into the ground and was afraid to make any movement. The gorilla was not afraid of anything, including the man. It picked up some huge green leaves and began to throw them into the fire. The fire died down. Jacob timidly approached the trees and began to help. Burning picked up the wet leaves. Then the animal grunted and began to throw a handful of sand into the fire. And Jacob, overcoming the fear of this huge creature, helped him in this as well. Together, they were able to put out the fire. Jacob could not believe that all this was happening to him. To think that a wild animal helped to put out the fire that had started. But the guy still shunned the gorilla. Wild animals are unpredictable and always pose a danger. That he knew for sure, especially gorillas. These giants are very strong. And a fight, if it happens at any rate, will end in death for an unarmed man. But this gorilla didn't seem to have any intention of hurting him. It began to walk away slowly, but all the time it turned its head and made some movements with its huge long arms. Jacob could not understand what this animal wanted from him. The guy continued to stand in place and looked after the departing burn, and that as if waiting for him. And now it stopped again and looked at Jacob with a long attentive look, but the guy still did not move from his seat. He did not understand what she wanted from him. After a few minutes of such silent tactics, the gorilla moved back to Jacob. The guy was seriously startled and began to back away slowly. Again, without making any sudden movements. But the gorilla kept speeding up its step. And then Jacob so panicked that he rushed into the forest. He knew it was best not to run from animals. But now he was terrified, and running could save his life. Jacob had never been known for his speed, but now he could easily win all the school Olympics. And not only school Olympics in running, including sprints. The gorilla, not thinking long, ran after him in a huge race. After a few minutes of this frantic race, Jacob began to pant, but continued to run. After all, his life depended on it. But still the huge animal caught up with him. Suddenly the gorilla came out of a thicket and grew a furry colossus right in front of Jacob, and he ran straight into its immense figure. The boy froze and trembled with fear. But that's it. Here comes my death, he managed to think. But the gorilla rose on its hind legs, walked past the lad and poked him in the back with its heavy meal. Jacob involuntarily moved forward like a puppet led by a puppeteer. He really felt like a puppet. Then the gorilla began to push him in the back regularly, and Jacob had no choice but to go wherever she pushed him. Thus, they came back to the clearing where they had recently met. Jacob gradually realized that he was in no danger, and this monkey still just wanted to take him somewhere. The guy hoped that it would not be its ancestral home. Maybe the animal knew where the exit from the jungle was and was pushing him there. Hopefully, he thought. And so they walked side by side for quite some time. He had long since lost track of time. On the relative plain, they descended into some lowlands. Only now Jacob realized that all this time was far above sea level. However, the place where the gorilla led the guy was not at all like an exit from the jungle. On the contrary, it seemed to be the deepest part of the rainforest. And then Jacob saw many people in strange attire. He realized that it was some kind of local settlement in the middle of the jungle. Finally, an old man noticed the new arrivals. He was probably the chief. At least, so it seemed to the haggard men. To the boy this chief, as Jacob mentally dubbed him. With a proud gait, he approached the poor guy and asked him something. But Jacob did not understand a thing. This language was completely unfamiliar to him. The boy stood and looked at the leader with naive eyes. The old man repeated his question. And only now Jacob realized that this is not some unfamiliar language of the natives, but ordinary English. Apparently, from fear, he had forgotten how people speak. And it seemed that the leader asked him who he was. Jacob thought a little, and then, but terrible English with an accent to twist words, said, "I am Jacob Tourist. I need a hotel. I'm lost. You help me." The leader looked at the strange stranger in bewilderment. The whole village was watching them. Who was this stranger and where did he come from? After a few minutes and a dozen questions, the old man realized that he would not get anything out of this frightened young man. This guy didn't understand anything, and he couldn't even speak. The leader ordered to give him a hut and food. The young girls fussed and started running around, following orders. One of them approached Jacob, took him under the arm, and led him deep into the village. The boy turned around, but the gorilla who had brought him here was nowhere to be found. For a second, He thought that he imagined it all because of the lack of water. He must have found the village by accident. The girl sat him down on a log that was used as a bench. Opposite him on the same log sat two boys, about 10, 11 years old. They were discussing something animatedly, but Jacob could not understand a word. And looking in the chassis, he realized that the improvised benches were around the fire. The guy assumed that this is where various meetings are held, and perhaps cooking food. However, the second option he immediately discarded. As soon as he saw a man who had a special table for food and a stone device that could be called a brazier. The man was already roasting something on the fire, and Jacob hoped it was food for him. This whole trip had made him very tired. He was very hungry, and he was also terribly thirsty. But the girl who accompanied him had disappeared, and he was ashamed to ask the boys for water. So Jacob decided to get water himself. Surely there must have been something like a well. The boy stood up and surveyed the area. The village was quite large. To the right and left were small houses. They were mostly all made of clay and bamboo. He passed by a cook who had a separate hut for cooking. I guess you could call it a kitchen or even a restaurant. Jacob grinned. After passing a few more cabins, he came to an uninhabited area. Further on, the jungle stretched out again. Jacob never found one. But he did hear a soft sound and a rustling. It was definitely a stream. At first, he wanted to ask one of the locals if it was possible to go there. But there was no one around, and he was so thirsty that he decided to go there. One stream could be heard very well. Clearly, it was not far away. No one would notice he was missing. Jacob walked down the small, not densely packed slope and headed for the water. The sun was already hiding behind the horizon, and the water reflected a beautiful orange sunset. The boy was very happy when he saw the crystal clear water. First, he decided to wash his face and tidy up a bit. His face was smeared with dirt, and understandably so. Jacob put out fires and then ran from a gorilla that ended up saving his life. All these events were whirling through his head. And the guy thanked God that he was able to find some civilization, if this society could be called civilized. What if they were cannibals? The thought made him break out in a cold sweat again. He tried to distract himself, washed his face, and drank the cool water greedily for a long time. She seemed like a blessing to him. The water was so pleasant that Jacob decided to take a little swim. He took off his shoes and dipped his feet into the rivulets. What happened afterward was etched in his memory forever. Sitting by the creek with his steps submerged in the cool water, he saw in the distance some floating log. Then it seemed to him to be a man lying down altogether. After a few more seconds, he saw someone's eyes on the log. Clearly not human eyes. Suddenly, Jacob realized that it was not a log at all. It was a real crocodile. The giant predator shows out of the water more and more. Quickly approached Jacob. Young man, how glued. Sat on the shore and looked at this horrifying sight. It was as if he had frozen from shock. He was pulled out of his stupor by a piercing scream. "Run, save yourself. Run, you idiot," shouted a woman's voice from behind in English. Now Jacob didn't need to be told again. Twice he tore from his seat like a good sprinter. The boy raced away from the creek back into the depths of the jungle. At this point, he didn't care where he ran. As far away from the fearsome beast as possible. The chase was on. The crocodile didn't seem to have organized. And Jacob calmed down a bit and stopped, breathing heavily. After a few minutes, the very girl who had sat him down by the fire and promised to give him a tour of the village approached him. She seemed to be the one who had saved him. She was now dressed in hunting clothes. If you could call it normal clothing, she was wearing some sort of linear, short bandage, covering everything below the waist, and the same bandage barely covering her breasts. Jacob was even a little embarrassed to see her like that. After all, in the village her clothes were more closed. "How did you even end up here?" she shouted in good Polish. Jacob was amazed. What is this? The effects of repeated shocks so affected that he began to understand the natives. "Well, I was brought by a gorilla." Embarrassedly began to answer the guy, feeling like in a bad nightmare. No, the fool is not in the village. And here by the stream the girl was angry. I wanted a drink of water, and it seemed to me that nothing would happen. If I just took a sip of some clean water from the brook, a creek, do you know that in this nice creek it's awfully dirty? There are dangerous animals in that part of the jungle. Only hunters are allowed in that part of the jungle. I didn't know. I just wanted to. I don't care what you wanted. I'll take you back to the village to the chief. Let him decide what to do with such an idiot. Jacob guiltily lowered his head. It seemed to him that he was a delinquent schoolboy who was reprimanded by the teacher. In the end, of course, the guy obeyed and went after the girl. This village was his only chance for salvation. What's your name? After a few minutes of silence, asked Jacob. The girl seemed to understand his language very well. Indifferently answered the stranger, removing leaves with a stick. That name means something. Well, that means, the girl said snidely. But you don't need to know it. Say your name. Jacob, said the guy, following her. Jacob. Coco interrogated. And what does that mean? And then the guy smiled victoriously. He had waited his whole life for such a question. It could seem that his head even climbed up from pride. Strong, pronounced Jacob confidently and proudly. Strong and brave. That at the creek I did not see any manifestation of these wonderful qualities, said Coco. Jacob felt offended by such a remark. Yes, he really was not particularly strong physically, but mentally he was a very serious competitor to many potential opponents. However, no one seemed to care about that here. They had almost reached the village when suddenly Coco asked, pointing at his shoulder, "What's that you've got there?" Jacob at first didn't understand what she meant. However, then guessed what caught her attention was a camera. The guy explained. Camera. Clumsily pronounced, the girl swallows half of the sounds of the device that helps you take pictures. Photo. What? Then Jacob realized that this local beauty, really very far from civilization, and really, how could she know of the existence of such a beautiful machine here in the jungle? A beautiful picture, a piece of the past that you can look at an infinite number of times, the boy explained. He felt as if he were talking to a child. The people who were far removed from such basic things were indeed like children. Even modern city children knew much more than these natives. Jacob still didn't understand why tribes like this still existed. The world has long gone far away. Progress has reached its peak, and there are still somewhere people who still roast meat on the fire. And not just shish kebab from the store, but meat that they themselves and extracted. And there was no need to say anything about education, views, politics. These people did not understand such things and, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, did not want to understand. They were happy here, away from it all. When they reached the place, Coco put him on the same log from which he had run away. The boys, on the other hand, were gone. A brief twilight came, and then abruptly, in an instant, as happens in the southern latitudes, solid darkness. After a while, Jacob finally saw in the distance, by the light of torches, Coco and the old man of the chief coming toward him. This time, the tribal leader did not waste time in English, but delivered an angry monologue in his native tongue. And Coco began to translate it into Polish. My father is very angry at your behavior. No one leaves this village without warning. He decided to help you, thus taking responsibility for your life. Responsibility. Jacob interjected. It is the custom. We are not often ordered to us wanderers, but if they do, we try to help them properly. We are taking you under our wing, and it is our job to keep you alive. Tell the chief I'm sorry. I was just thirsty. The girl said something to the chief, and the man listened to her glumly. He looked at Jacob incredulously. He said something to Coco and walked away, tapping his cane on the ground. The girl stepped closer to the boy and declared, My father gave you a hut. Now I will take you to where you can eat. Jacob's eyes rounded. That was your father. Why does that surprise you so much? As if even insulted Coco. And then abruptly turned around and walked away, leaving the guy alone again. Jacob was extremely surprised and even discouraged. He himself did not understand why he had such a strange reaction. For some reason he thought that the old man had no one. It was surprising to see such a young girl and know that she was the daughter of a profound old man. Jacob might have assumed she was his granddaughter. But daughter, his musings were interrupted again by the appearance of Coco. "Let's go," threw the girl and took the boy's hand. She pulled him behind her, and he, like an obedient puppy, followed her. They came to a hut. It smelled of meat. Do these natives really know how to cook? The guide and the girl entered the room, and Jacob was even surprised that there was a real wooden table with wooden chairs. After all, civilization had not gone so far from them. The interior was very similar to the old Slavic hut. Only the hut itself and all the furnishings were made of bamboo. The girl sat him down at the table and left. To what? That must have been where the kitchen was. The guy once again looked around the house, the table, chairs on the wall, some herbs, honored, incomprehensible objects. Jacob didn't have time to look at everything yet, as Coco came back again with a full plate of food. What was even more striking was that the plate was clay. That meant that their pottery art was thriving as well. They have every chance of being a great community, thought the boy. The dish consisted of meat steak and some kind of very tasty sauce. In a separate cover, they served a strange cereal. "What is it?" With distrust in his voice, Jacob asked the girl. "Food," arrogantly replied Coco, sitting down across from the guy. "I understand, but what exactly is the food?" Suddenly the guy felt like an idiot. He was given a night's lodging, meat, which is clearly not given to everyone. And he's showing off. "This is meat," as she pointed her finger right at the steak, "and this is porridge. Eat it, and don't kick it. It's not every day you get a meal like this. But your father said you look very malnourished, so today you can eat something we don't eat very often." Jacob looked at the dish once more and was about to start eating, as suddenly realized that he did not even have a fork, but something like a fork. Pitifully, he asked. The girl left again for the thing and came back with a wooden spoon. She handed him this cutlery. "We eat meat with our hands," with a chuckle, she explained. "But for you guest, I'll make an exception." Jacob, of course, was a little surprised, but remembered that these people are aborigines. They live by their own rules. After a few minutes of lively eating food, Jacob still dared to ask another question. "And how do you know Polish?" "Since childhood." "Not interested," replied Coco, looking as another spoon is sent into the mouth of the guest. "And why then only you speak the language, and so well?" The girl was silent. She clearly wanted to say something, but for some reason it was hard for her to do it. "My mom and I were in a plane crash." Finally, she spoke. "When I was 5 years old, we were flying to the sea, then a terrible blow. I don't remember anything else. Once here, we didn't know what to do and finally found this village. A month later, the chief made my mother his wife. But a few years later, she died. Aya stayed here." "I'm sorry," Jacob said sympathetically. He was always afraid to fly, and apparently not in vain. "If you don't die in the crash, you'll fall prey to all sorts of predatory creatures, or starve to death. That's why Jacob was so scared when he got lost. He thought that he would stay forever in this wild place, and he would be eaten by predators or bitten by a snake, or he would just die here for nothing. After about a minute of silence, Jacob decided to speak up again. "Thank you for what?" surprised asked the girl. "For saving me from that crocodile. And for the food is not necessary to thank me." "Speak, thank your father. He saved you. I'm just running an errand. It must be hard on your father. Why did he lose his favorite wife?" The girl was a little embarrassed, and then let out a small laugh. "I don't think it's hard for him." "Jacob." Coco giggled. "He has 8 other wives, and all of them are alive and well, and his children can't even be counted." Jacob is in complete shock. Look down at him. 8 wives. He almost shouted. Yes, Jacob and all of them he loves. Continue to make fun of him, Coco. The guy, to digest this information, asked the next important question. "You weren't always called Coco, were you?" The girl's face darkened. It seemed that she still regretted something. "No, of course not," she answered politely. "It's my old name that my mother gave me, Alice. She always called me Alice. But when the chief married my mother, I was given another name for my new life. My mother changed her name too, and I was only 5 years old, so I did not resist." Everything seemed like a game to me then. So what is the significance of the name Coco? The girl smiled again, and there was no trace of her sad face. But I don't know, maybe beautiful, she said flirtatiously. But why should a name have any meaning? Do you care? A name can say a lot about a person. Why is that, I tell you? Isn't that you? Making friends with the spirits? To my people, name matters, yes, but to me it's just a bunch of letters. In confidence, I had so much fun when I was 5 with the chickens repeating Coco over and over. It's probably stupid. But at that moment, I didn't think about anything else. I said I'd be called Coco. Sounds like a really good name to me. I'm not arguing. The boy smiled. He finally finished his portion, even though he was hungry. Coco dragged him outside. Dad said to take you to your cabin, but I want to show you something. Jacob nodded and followed his mysterious mistress. By now she no longer looked like she was by the stream. She was wearing a light white dress or tunic obliged by a sash. It might even have been night. However, it was hardly their custom to walk in night attire with a stranger like Jacob, but this girl was clearly guilty. Not to all the traditions of this people she seemed free and intelligent. Jacob didn't manage to speak to the rest of the population, but he wouldn't have been able to. Only Coco spoke Polish here. And it was a great luck and a real miracle under the circumstances they came to some clearing hidden by trees. Jacob possessed a feeling as if he had fallen into a fairy tale. Everywhere flew, light and grew the most beautiful plants, which Jacob had never seen anywhere. He already wanted to take out his camera and start taking pictures of this fabulous beauty. But what stopped him? Let you show your magic thing in action later. For now, just enjoy the stars, pronounced the girl. The guy raised his head and was shocked by what he saw. Everything was dotted with a scattering, the brightest stars, myriads and myriads of sparkling lights, mysterious darkness. And such a sight is not seen much anywhere. Here the sky seemed fabulously unreal, as if he was not in the jungle, but on some other unknown planet millions of light years away from old Earth. Jacob looked, but the doll was sitting in the grass, looking upward. Her eyes reflected the entire cosmos. It was something eternal, unthinkable, unimaginable. The whole image was somehow so in harmony with untouched nature, with this impossible beauty around. She was so engrossed in the spectacle of the night sky that she didn't even notice Jacob taking her picture. The girl only heard a faint click. "What did you do?" Startled, she shrieked. She jumped up from her seat, but the guy just walked over to her and showed her the finished picture on the small display. His expensive camera had this feature, something Jacob was very proud of. The girl took a long and incredulous look at the image. "Is that me?" Coco asked with some naivety. "It's you," confirmed the guy, sitting down next to her. The picture was indeed wonderful. It showed the beautiful Coco sitting surrounded by the rainforest and looking upward with her head down. And in the background, the endless black sky is studded with sprinkles of stars. This picture would sell very well, Jacob thought. "Could you take more?" Coco suddenly asked. The guy nodded affirmatively and put the camera in front of them, beforehand turning on the delay. After a few seconds there was a click, and then a flash, like a small lightning bolt, dazzled them, and for a moment the selfies were ready. "It turned out really cute," Coco said, embarrassed. She looked at him with eyes that sparkled with happiness and delight. "You'll teach me to do the same." Jacob felt a certain pride. Finally, his talent was appreciated. "I will," Jacob replied with a smile. He looked at the doll and could not take his eyes off her. She was so beautiful against the backdrop of all that fabulous nature. He wished they could sit like that for eternity, but this idyll was interrupted by a roar from the jungle. The whole fairy tale immediately evaporated, and only the menacing reality of the wild rainforest remained. "We should be worried," said Coco. They walked towards the village. On the way, the boy got a chill, but he didn't pay much attention to it. They stopped at the hut he had been given for temporary shelter. "Here you can finally rest," the girl said with a smile. "Good night." Jacob did not hide his new sympathy. His answering smile brightened up to his ears. "Sweet dreams, Coco," whispered Jacob. The girl walked off in the opposite direction. It turned out that their huts were located opposite each other. He watched her for a long time. She looked back a few times and got embarrassed. After giving her a glance, Jacob still managed to overcome himself and entered the hut. The place was as simple as the previous dude of grass on the floor. A low, huge tray of unknown purpose and a bamboo curly leg. Jacob lay down on the soft, soulful bed and immediately forgot himself with sleep. And his thoughts again carried to that clearing where he sat just now how much the girl sat motionless, again watching the stars. Jacob cautiously approached her and sat down beside her. That's how they would have sat. But Coco suddenly asked suspiciously, "Why are you lying?" "Lying?" The boy asked incredulously. "It's not her you love, it's me." The girl turned her head to him, but it was no longer Coco, but Anna. "So who do you love?" Jacob, in a sneaky way, asked the guide. The guy wanted to be here less and less. He broke into a cold sweat, then threw into a fever. "I am your love," or this worthless Coco screamed at the top of Anna's voice, turning into some unknown monster. Jacob was terribly frightened by this. He tried to run away, but his legs turned to stone and wouldn't listen to him. He stayed in one place and tried with all his might to escape from there. "You're not going anywhere," the girl whispered. "Snake." And at that moment her face was so distorted that he cried out in terror and woke up in a sweat, covered with anxious goosebumps. Jacob tried to recover his heavy breathing. This was the ultimate nightmare. He was terribly festering. His head ached terribly. It felt like it was about to split open. Jacob decided to go outside, to breathe. The images from the nightmare finally dissipated, but he still felt all his body unbearable, muscular pain. He was broken, twisted, and tormented. He didn't realize what was happening to him. The village was quiet. It looked like everyone was already asleep, however, in some huts. There was still a weak fire burning. The boy decided to sit on a log by the extinguished fire. From here he could see the stars very well. He was shaking with a small tremor, but still remembered the doll and her glowing eyes. This girl in just a few hours had managed to draw him away so much. He couldn't think of anything but her. Her beautiful blonde hair neatly braided into somewhat intricately their pigtails' bottomless eyes in which you could see the cosmos. The guy realized that he had fallen head over heels in love with that land of polished descent. Could it be that fortune finally turned the right way and he could find his happiness? But Jacob did not like to think ahead and make plans deep into the night. He made the decision to go back to bed and try to sleep, ignoring the pain in his head, which was only getting worse. He went into the cabin, but when he wanted to lie down, he realized that it wasn't his bed at all. There was already a man lying on it. As he got used to the darkness, he realized that this house was much more spacious, and there was more than one bed. Then he began to distinguish someone's silhouettes. Someone had lit a fire. And then Jacob heard a piercing scream. There were women screaming from two sides at once. They all lit their lamps. It was only then that Jacob realized that he had mixed up the huts. There were so many women and girls here, and many were completely leggy. He immediately turned away so as not to embarrass them. "Please excuse me, I seem to have mixed up the huts. I didn't mean to." The guy started to make excuses. Suddenly someone's hand touched him and then pushed him outside. He found himself on the street. Raising his head, Jacob saw Coco. She was covering herself with some sort of cloak. "What are you doing here?" She hissed at him. Exactly like a recent nightmare. "I told you," the guy started, but didn't finish. "Here you can finally rest," the girl said with a smile. "Good night." Jacob did not hide his new sympathy. His answering smile brightened up to his ears. "Sweet dreams, Coco," whispered Jacob. The girl walked off in the opposite direction. It turned out that their huts were located opposite each other. He watched her for a long time. She looked back a few times and got embarrassed. After giving her a glance, Jacob still managed to overcome himself and entered the hut. The place was as simple as the previous dude of grass on the floor. A low, huge tray of unknown purpose and a bamboo curly leg. Jacob lay down on the soft, soulful bed and immediately forgot himself with sleep. And his thoughts again carried to that clearing where he sat just now how much the girl sat motionless, again watching the stars. Jacob cautiously approached her and sat down beside her. That's how they would have sat. But Coco suddenly asked suspiciously, "Why are you lying?" "Lying?" The boy asked incredulously. "It's not her you love. It's me." The girl turned her head to him, but it was no longer Coco, but Anna. "So who do you love?" Jacob, in a sneaky way, asked the guide. The guy wanted to be here less and less. He broke into a cold sweat, then threw into a fever. "I am your love," or this worthless Coco screamed at the top of Anna's voice, turning into some unknown monster. Jacob was terribly frightened by this. He tried to run away, but his legs turned to stone and wouldn't listen to him. He stayed in one place and tried with all his might to escape from there. "You're not going anywhere," the girl whispered. "Snake." And at that moment her face was so distorted that he cried out in terror and woke up in a sweat, covered with anxious goosebumps. Jacob tried to recover his heavy breathing. This was the ultimate nightmare. He was terribly festering. His head ached terribly. It felt like it was about to split open. Jacob decided to go outside, to breathe. The images from the nightmare finally dissipated, but he still felt all his body unbearable, muscular pain. He was broken, twisted, and tormented. He didn't realize what was happening to him. The village was quiet. It looked like everyone was already asleep, however, in some huts. There was still a weak fire burning. The boy decided to sit on a log by the extinguished fire. From here he could see the stars very well. He was shaking with a small tremor, but still remembered the doll and her glowing eyes. This girl in just a few hours had managed to draw him away so much. He couldn't think of anything but her. Her beautiful blonde hair neatly braided into somewhat intricately their pigtails' bottomless eyes in which you could see the cosmos. The guy realized that he had fallen head over heels in love with that land of polished descent. Could it be that fortune finally turned the right way and he could find his happiness? But Jacob did not like to think ahead and make plans deep into the night. He made the decision to go back to bed and try to sleep, ignoring the pain in his head, which was only getting worse. He went into the cabin, but when he wanted to lie down, he realized that it wasn't his bed at all. There was already a man lying on it. As he got used to the darkness, he realized that this house was much more spacious, and there was more than one bed. Then he began to distinguish someone's silhouettes. Someone had lit a fire. And then Jacob heard a piercing scream. There were women screaming from two sides at once. They all lit their lamps. It was only then that Jacob realized that he had mixed up the huts. There were so many women and girls here, and many were completely leggy. He immediately turned away so as not to embarrass them. "Please excuse me, I seem to have mixed up the huts. I didn't mean to." The guy started to make excuses. Suddenly someone's hand touched him and then pushed him outside. He found himself on the street. Raising his head, Jacob saw Coco. She was covering herself with some sort of cloak. "What are you doing here?" She hissed at him. Exactly like a recent nightmare. "I told you," the guy started, but didn't finish. Something twitched in his right leg. An unbearable pain shot through his body, and he collapsed to the ground. "What's the matter with you?" The girl was frightened. "Stop making a fool of yourself. Get up and go to your hut." But Jacob could not move an arm or a leg. He fell into a kind of paralysis. Every movement gave him terrible pain. Coming to his senses a little, he considered, or rather fumbled for, the huge holes in his hands as he examined them. Coco touched his forehead. "You're burning up," she whispered and dashed off. She had only been gone a minute. But for Jacob, that minute felt like an eternity. His hands were shaking. Every muscle in her body whimpered, her skin ached, and purple spots appeared on her arms. Finally, Coco came back with her. There was some other woman. They took him under their arms and carried him to the opposite hut. His hut he only woke up when they threw him on a bed and rubbed him with cold water. Aya brought her leaves for both the rack and the water. Commanded Coco to her companion, and the herbs we gathered last full moon. While saying this, Coco placed a wet cloth on Jacob's forehead. "What's wrong with me?" Jacob could barely manage to ask. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "You have tropical fever," completely calmly said Coco. It's common here for newcomers. I'll live. It's the fever my mother died of, Coco said mournfully. But I'll do everything I can to make you well. The first few hours are the hardest. You'll be nauseous, achy, twisted, and in general, you'll be in terrible pain. But I know a medicine that will help you, so just bear with me. About 5 minutes passed in silence. Finally, her friend returned with a basket of herbs. They plowed on quite well. However, the last thing that bothered Jacob now was the taste and smell of coca. Taking that basket, she began to throw something into a clay-black pot. Then she stirred that mixture with a spoon. It was getting worse by the second. He was living nonstop. Coco's handmaidens, Aya kept sighing and looking sympathetically at the guy. Finally, after about 20 minutes, Coco got the medicine mixture she needed. She transferred the contents of the pot into a glass and gave it to Jacob. "Drink," she commanded. Bottoms up. The boy didn't have to be coaxed for long. In 10 seconds, the entire glass was emptied. "Now we just have to wait," Coco said thoughtfully. "Aya, can you go to bed? I'll stay to watch him." "But Coco, our father is uncertain," said Aya. "Our father is already asleep, and you should go." Aya replied Coco stiffly. She obeyed the order and left. Several hours passed. During all this time, Jacob experienced every kind of pain known in the world. First, he had a fever. Then his whole body shook with a terrible cold. He was turned inside out. His brain seemed to explode and boil in his head, and his arms and legs were in such pain as if they were being twisted out of his body without anesthesia. And all the while Coco sat beside him. She didn't move a step away. In her eyes read sincere sympathy. At one point, when Jacob once again began to choke, he asked, addressing himself, not knowing to whom, "Anna, tell me the truth. I'm about to die. I will do everything possible to prevent this from happening." With a sigh, his volunteer nurse replied, "Most likely, you will recover. This decoction will help you. It helps almost everyone. You'll feel better." The girl was right. After several hours of agony just before dawn, Jacob felt much better. The fever had gone down, the cramps had stopped. Of course, the muscles were still aching. However, it was already a tolerable pain. In the morning, the guy fell asleep with the normal sleep of convalescence. Up to this point, as it was with him, he was awakened by a horrible noise that grew louder by the second. The door fell away and a menacing chief came in, shouting something in his own language. Of course, Jacob didn't understand a word of it. The boy had just woken up, and his sleepy mind did not yet understand what was going on. The chief pointed his index finger at Jacob. He was frightened and moved to the wall. 2 muscular natives entered the hut and lifted him from the bed. Jacob tried to resist, but all was unsuccessful. The men dragged him down the street. Dirt and sand stained him all over and all over again like the day before. Jacob was still feeling rather ill. Of course, he was no longer dying like the night before, but his head still split open in pain. The guy was tied to a tall wooden pole. He punctured himself at first, but his body completely, and without 2 lived strong ropes. Only now Jacob realized that he was in the center of the village by the very fire around which the logs were standing. The lad had not noticed this pillar. Yesterday, a lot of people began to gather around it. They all looked at him with anger. "Yesterday, you stranger defamed the honorable names of my wives and daughters," the chieftain said loudly, "and for that you paid with your life." The chief came as close to the boy as he could, hooked his cane in Jacob's chest, and almost whispered said in English, "We were kind to you, and you turned out to be a snake." After these words, the man turned around and walked away. The others followed his example. Jacob was left alone with himself. The young man looked around. On one of the neighboring poles hung the skeleton of a man. The boy was horrified. Did he really get into the lair of the ogres? God, how many things can happen to a man in 2 days? And what's he in for? Why? He began to mentally feel sorry for himself and fell into a real despair. He was well aware that the chances of rescue were now slim to none. But why had they done this to him? To this question he had no intelligible answer. The mutterings of the chief did not count. Where's Coco? Why hadn't she come to his aid? He He was beginning to get a bad headache again, and thirsty on top of it. The sun was at the very horizon, and it was scorching and so splitting his head. It was probably around noon by now. Jacob could feel the sweat running down his body and covering his eyes. His itching and muscle aches started again. It was a terrible torment, for the guy couldn't move a single muscle. The only thing he cared about was where Coco had gone. There were a lot of related questions. Had she abandoned him in such a dire situation? Why had she saved his life yesterday if she realized that in the morning he would be tied to the damn pole? There were no answers, of course, and the thirst tormented him more and more. So did the flies and blinders that periodically landed on his fleshy body and bit the unfortunate man. Soon the sufferer's lips were shooting and burning as if on fire. He badly needed water, plain water, please. But when people passed by the pole to his cries for help, no one paid the slightest attention, and certainly no one rushed to bring him water. On the contrary, they stopped, pointed their fingers at him, and laughed. Surely the leader must have let them know that this foreigner was a horrible person who didn't deserve to live. Possessing a well-developed sense of humor, the guy even laughed at his stupid death. He could have drowned on the boat, could have died in the jaws of a crocodile, or just lost forever in the jungle, could have suffered from the deadly embrace of a gorilla. He could have died of tropical fever, but instead he's hanging. Now on that damn pole like a Christian martyr. Yes, Mrs. Fortune was clearly not on his side. After some more time, Jacob began to lose consciousness. Weak from the recent fever, exhausted by the past events and the hot sun, deprived of the ability to move suffering from thirst, he fell more and more often, either into sleep or into delirium. In rare intervals of consciousness, the boy realized where he was and realized that he had not long to suffer. Without water, he would last another couple of hours at most. But suddenly, Jacob saw with the corner of his eye Aya passing by. She was carrying 2 buckets of water, and she was clearly struggling. The guy tried to shout to her, but from behind your voice came out only pitifully and squeak. The girl turned around. In her eyes read sympathy. However, she could not do anything and was about to leave. But Jacob tried to stop her, gathering all his last strength. Aya, simple young man. The girl looked around suspiciously. There was no one on the street. Then she cautiously approached the pole on which the guy was hanging. Please give me some water, Jacob asked. Aya looked around again to make sure no one was following her. She picked up some sort of dirty clay vessel, lying in the dust. Someone must have left it here a long time ago and splashed water from a bucket into it, brought the vessel to Jacob's lips, and the boy greedily took a sip of water. Now this liquid seemed to him the most delicious in the world. Jacob drank the entire vessel in a matter of seconds. He did not even have time to thank Aya. She immediately ran away. Probably she would be very hurt too, if the people of the tribe found out that she had helped their nephew. Jacob was feeling much better now. The sun wasn't so scorching anymore. The case drew closer to evening, but the fever continued to torment the lad. It seemed that the potion Coco had given him was only effective for a certain amount of time. He realized that his new fate was no better than his old one. He was dying again, only now not from the thirst of a tropical disease. Jacob remembered his parents, his cousin, and cried. Now he will never see them again. He was lucky to get here in this damn jungle. Why did he have to go on this vile journey? If he just stayed home, everything would have been all right. Night fell. The boy had already begun to pray to all known gods for death. His head split open his muscles. His body was cramping, and his arms and legs were covered with holes. When will this hell end? Screamed the boy in despair. He screamed and howled like a wild animal, but no one even came near him. At some point, coming to my senses from forgetting, I discovered that it was already night. The moon was shining very brightly. The silence, breaking mine, only by the rare cries of forest creatures drove me crazy. Jacob moaned quietly in pain. Suddenly, the young man heard some kind of crunch. At first it seemed to him in a painful delirium that this terrible monster was coming to devour him. But in a few minutes Coco appeared at the pillar. She looked very depressed and tired. The girl stopped near the unfortunate prisoner and looked at him sadly. Coco, you are. You have come for me. You will save me. Gasping with joy, wheezed Jacob. But she gave him a judgmental look. Shut up, she whispered. The boy immediately shut his mouth. Now he really hoped no one had heard his joyful wheezes. Coco walked over to the pole and began to tie the ropes one by one. Jacob's legs came free first, then his arms as well. Freed from the restraints, he collapsed to the ground, limbs so used up that they simply refused to work. Poetry after me, whispered the girl. The boy did not hesitate. He strained all his will and crawled after his savior nice. So they passed several huts, trying to keep in the darkest places. Suddenly, a man appeared in the distance. The girl pushed the boy with her foot, pushing him into some dark prologue between the two wives. She herself, too, dived in after him. They lurched, trying not even to breathe. A man in hunting clothes walked past them. On his back hung a bow, and in his hands he carried the carcass of a rather large animal. Fortunately, he was so happy with his prey that he paid no attention to the couple. When the man finally disappeared, Coco peered around the corner to survey the situation. No one was there. Let's go in a whisper, she said. Finally, they left the village and came to a large clearing. It was similar to the one he had sat on the night before last, looking up at the stars. There was more brush and no water nearby. It was probably the most common of the jungle. Jacob was weak and shaking with sickness and fear. Here he was also very uneasy. Suddenly, the village would discover the missing and give chase. But the young man hoped that Coco knew what he was doing. Suddenly, something very strange happened. The girl clapped her hands, made an incomprehensible guttural sound, and then stomped 3 times on the ground. What are you doing? Jacob was indignant. We're about to be heard. But the girl paid no attention to his protests and continued the same actions. 2 claps, a strange sound, stomping feet. 2 claps, stomping feet. 2 claps, stomping feet. After a while, horrifying sounds were heard. Jacob realized that some large animal was running straight at them. He folded himself with fright. Again he thought that his death had come. His exhausted mind refused to think straight. He was about to run. He jerked. But what stopped him? Jacob, just trusted me, softly said the girl. Soothingly, and the tone in which she said those words worked on Jacob. He stopped and followed the girl's example. She waited. There was confidence in her gaze. Finally, someone Jacob did not expect to see came into the clearing. It was the same gorilla that had brought him to the village the day before yesterday. Or maybe it was another one. The hell of it. Hello, Bamboo, gently said Coco, stroking low forehead of the animal. The huge beast bowed obediently to her as if she were its queen. The feeling between them was barely perceptible to outsiders. A strong bond was burning, clearly very attached to this girl. Just like I thought Jacob was. Do you know him? Surprised asked the young man. The girl tore her gaze away from the animal and turned to Jacob. Yes, this is my best friend, Bamboo. We've known each other since childhood. Coco smiled. Come, I'll tell the story. On the way, she said something quietly to Bamboo, and he easily, like a feather, picked up Jacob and put him on his powerful shoulders. Now we're going to be walking for a long time, Coco said businesslike. Try not to faint. Here, drink this, it will give you strength. She held out to him a vessel made of a noisy, unknown Jacob at a large plant fruit. Drink it, almost commanded Coco. Jacob took a sip of the liquid contents of the vessel. It turned out to be quite pleasant to the taste, gave off herbs and as if honey. However, now he would drink anything to hold out and survive. By the way, to what limit would he have to hold out? He must have asked that question out loud, because Coco answered him, we're heading for the coast. Hold on, darling. She told him the story of how she had once met her furry friend in this jungle. Then, in his half-delirium, the boy could only catch bits and pieces of it. But then, a few years later, he remembered everything he had heard on that distant, almost fantastical night, and wrote it down to preserve it forever. Coco, let's go, shouted Aya, putting on her bow. We won't catch any animals because of you. Doll is in her leather hunting bag. I can't find the bracelet. Sadly, she said. You will. Then we'll go already. You don't understand, it's Mom's bracelet. It brought her luck. I never go hunting without it. Coco, if we don't go into the woods right now, my father will make bags out of us instead of crocodile. Coco sighed and walked out of the hut. Her sister was completely right. We can still live without the bracelet, but not without clothes and food. Okay, let's have a bow already, asked someone handed her a weapon, and the girls went into the forest. Father said to pick more berries, so the animals today will not touch almost, said Aya doll only nodded. Her mood was very spoiled by the missing bracelet. It was the only thing she had gotten from her mother after she was gone. Everything had changed. It was how he had started living on his own. Now there was no longer a person to answer for her actions. 2 hours passed. The girls picked a lot of berries and loaded them into special cloth bags that were fastened around their necks. It was very convenient to walk with them on the mountainous terrain. They were already walking a few miles away from the village and suddenly heard a terrible cry. Aya got into a fighting stance and prepared her bow. Someone's coming at us. Get ready to shoot. Aya whispered loudly to her sister. They had already drawn their arrows. And as soon as the predator appeared on the horizon, they fired. Then it became clear that it was a gorilla, and it was advancing towards them at a great leap. But its wounds were mortal, and its strength was running out. At last, the mortally wounded beast collapsed. The girls gingerly approached it and examined it. The gorilla was not yet dead. It was sighing heavily. Careful noticed an oddity in its behavior. The gorilla was hiding something in its furry paws. Examining the body more closely, the girls saw deep wounds. Clearly not shot. They looked like bites. Aya, come here. She called out to her sister. She walked over to Coco. These are teeth marks. Aya said thoughtfully. It looks like this gorilla was attacked. And at that moment, they heard a terrible growl. They turned around and saw a huge female leopard behind them. Aya immediately started shooting at the animal. Doll grabbed her spear. The wounded leopard lunged at Aya. And as soon as it did, Doll deftly impaled the beast with the sharp spear. When the girls had recovered from the shock, Coco made a stunning conclusion. So this gorilla didn't mean to attack us. It was fleeing. Suddenly, the sisters heard a thin cry. At first, they didn't realize where it was coming from. It was somewhere very close by. Then they realized that the sounds came from the gorilla, or rather from what it was holding in its paws. The girls looked at each other. Coco cautiously approached the animal with force, pulled her limbs apart, and pulled out a cub quite small. "Oh my God," was all Aya could utter as Coco held the creature and cried. The mother had saved him from the leopard, and we had killed her. There was silence. No one could say a word. What have we done? Broke the sepulchral silence. I'll never forgive myself for this. Coco, we didn't know. I'll take him with me, the girl suddenly declared. Aya looked at her in surprise. What are you talking about? She was indignant. Father won't allow you to keep him in the village. It could become dangerous when it grows up. It's a wild animal, Coco. I killed his mother, and now I have to take care of him. Didn't they teach you to help our lesser brothers? I don't know what you were taught, where you were born. But this is not our brother here. They'll grow up to be an animal as dangerous as his mother, and then destroy the whole village. I won't let you take him with you. Let's see what Father has to say about that. Coco said decisively and put the baby in her sinus. When they arrived at the village, they were already greeted by a crowd of people. The sisters had not been gone long enough, for the villagers were already starting to worry. Where have you been? Formidably asked the chief. Aya stepped forward and told them what had happened, but did not mention the fact that they had found a baby gorilla. I am very sorry to hear that, stated the chief, but I am glad you are alive. Take the berries you have picked, and you are free to go. The girls nodded affirmatively and walked towards the general supply depot. I didn't turn you in, Aya said as they laid out the berries. But if you don't confess to your father, I'll tell everything myself. So do it as soon as you can. Otherwise, it will be worse. You're a great sister, Aya replied Coco sarcastically. You're not my sister, and you never will be. Aya said and walked away. Coco almost cried at those words. It had been 10 years since her mother had been gone, and there had not been a day when she had not thought of her. It had been very hard for her. No one really understood her here, and no one would ever really love her. She's not like them. It's been a week since Coco got her pet. The girl named him Bomb. It was an unusual and made-up name by her. She fed the ox with his literal milk. He got stronger and got a little bigger. Now, I didn't communicate with Coco at all, but she didn't miss a chance to remind me that soon all secret things will be revealed. But Coco ignored her and continued to raise the poor baby. One day, the chief burst into her hut and ordered her to immediately take the gorilla to the jungle where it belonged. And Coco was severely punished. She wasn't supposed to leave the village for a week, but that didn't stop her. And on her first night, she went in search of her pet. The Bomb, she screamed. Coco had traveled quite a distance, but still hadn't found the cub. But then she heard a sound like a baby crying again. She followed that sound and came to a small ravine. These barbarians had thrown him in where he couldn't get out on his own. He was like a small bear cub trying to climb the walls and charge, but the ground only crumbled under his weight. The nimble Coco immediately got the poor little fellow out and gave him a drink of the ample milk she had brought with her. She was sure she would find him. Her hopes were realized. She left him in a secluded cave, the entrance to which she closed with a large heavy stone, and has visited every night since. So the Bomb rose before her eyes. After a while, when the baby became active enough, she began to train him. He hit on a whistle and came on a special command. The girl clapped her hands and then drowned dolls, became a real foster mother to him. As Jacob listened to this marvelous story to the end, he yawned. He yawned, closed in the thick fur, gorilla, and said, "What a rat yours is, Aya." Doll grinned and replied, "By the way, she was the one who told the chief about you climbing into our hut." The boy's eyes rounded. He was already wishing for this most horrible death. I mean, come to think of it, even the natives have such bitches. After a while, Jacob no longer remembered how and when they finally reached the coast. At the beginning of this strange journey, Jacob still tried to perceive something, but then completely shut down. The sickness of the experience, the nightmare and the terrible pain, finally overcame him. Meanwhile, Coco and Boing had finally reached the publicized tourist beach. The beach was at its most deafening pre-dawn an hour. And of course, no one was here right now. Then the girl gathered dry leaves of twigs and set them on fire with matches she found among Jacob's things. It seemed that when the flames flared up, Jacob instantly regained consciousness. He remembered bright flashes, but he had no strength at all. The last thing the boy heard and remembered were the words "cuckoo," "hold on, my love," or was he just imagining it? In a feverish delirium, she left Jacob on the beach next to a brightly burning fire, and together with the Bomb disappeared into the jungle. A few minutes later, one of the hotel guards noticed the flames and came to see what hooligans had set it up, but saw only poor half-dead Jacob, who knew from tropical fever. The man who found him screamed in terror and immediately called for help. Other people came running. After that, Jacob passed out again. Finally, he came to himself. Only a few days later found himself lying on a narrow couch. Every muscle in his body aching, and in his head is a mess. True, the head itself no longer split open from the pain, and the hole in his arms disappeared as if they had never existed. He looked around the room. His bunk was behind a curtain of semi-transparent white curtains, and it was quite clean. There were various medical devices and medicines. There were voices, moans, and even screams coming from somewhere. Jacob realized that he was in the local hospital. Here and there behind the curtains were heard lively conversations, mumbling, snoring, or long prayers in an incomprehensible language. There were long plastic tubes reaching out to him, and the young man was afraid to touch them. After a few minutes, the curtains were pulled back by the doctor. Jacob said dark hair and a man in white. "Yes," replied the boy uncertainly. "How do they know my name?" He thought, "I'm glad you're finally awake." The doctor continued in Polish. "My name is Alex. I studied in your country and know a little of the language. Your story has intrigued the whole hospital, I must say. You have tropical fever, quite common amongst newcomers to our area. Why didn't you get vaccinated before coming here?" Jacob only shrugged his shoulders. He never trusted unfamiliar inoculations, and what if it would only make things worse? I hope you'll tell us how you ended up in the jungle and how you managed to survive there for almost a whole week. I don't remember, weakly answered Jacob. How did I get here? He looked fearfully at the doctor. They're not after me. You were found on the hotel beach, the doctor said. You were immediately hospitalized here at our clinic. You were delirious for days. It took us a long time to find out who you were and where you were from. We checked with the police. Finally, a woman named Anna got in touch. She was your guide on a tour group. They've been looking for you all over the department for days, but that's for later. Right now, I need to assess your condition. The doctor examined the patient's ears, throat, nose, eyes, listened to his heart and breathing, counted his pulse, measured his blood pressure. Then he moved on to his legs and arms. The guy still wasn't fully oriented in his memories and started asking questions. Tell me, where's Coco? She came here with me. I mean, did I come with her or did I come? Rode in on such a huge beast. I'm sorry. The doctor was surprised. The girl from the village. His annoyance, Jacob wrinkled his nose, seeing that he was not understood. She saved me from those awful natives. You know, they tied me to a pole and she brought me to the beach. Well, not her, but her gorilla. What was her bomb then? The doctor touched the patient's forehead. There seems to be no heat. He said thoughtfully, perhaps you should rest some more. This disease is really very difficult. You do not believe me. Jacob was offended. Like a little doctor smiled, rest, gain strength. Soon the police will come to you. And this girl is your tour guide, Anna. Anna. Jacob could not believe that he had already forgotten this girl. Now there was only one Coco in his heart. He had really fallen in love with her. She had saved his life 3 times. Imagine that. Although maybe he was just dreaming. Suddenly there was no village and it was all in his mind. In a feverish delirium, Aboriginal tribe, reasonable gorilla, crocodiles, fierce chiefs, execution on a pole, naked girls in a hut, and Starry Night no, cannot be such. Had the girl of his dreams turned out to be only a barren image? But he was simply not allowed to think about it properly. What was it again? Behind her was Anna, Jacob. My God, how happy I am that you are alive, she exclaimed. We've all been looking for you for days. Didn't sleep at night. She even wept and hugged him. When she saw the haggard, thinning face of her ward, you probably didn't even eat. I'm fine. Been sick with tropical fever all these days. I'm so sorry, Jacob. Please forgive me. Please don't report me to the police. Anna was crying. The guy was in some kind of trance and still did not really understand what was happening. Anna, surprised, exclaimed to the young man, Is it really you? I am, of course I am. God, how wonderful that you finally found. Jacob assumed a semi-upright position on his bunk. Anna quietly and seriously began, Jacob, I want to tell you something, and please listen to me to the end. The girl was wary. I'm listening, and Jacob began to tell from the beginning. For some reason, when he met Anna, his mind was clear. He told her everything from the moment he ran after the parrot to the torture when he almost died on the pole. Anna's eyes visibly rounded after this story. She obviously thought that the guy was still delusional. Jacob, I do not want to offend you, but cautiously said the girl. But this disease, which you suffer from such clinical manifestations. The doctor said, I know. You all think I'm crazy? He turned his back to the wall and fell silent. Jacob did not believe anything anymore, not the doctor, not even himself. The reactions of the doctor and his guide sowed in him not eliminated and doubts about the plausibility of the story. But think about it, Anna told him, trying to make sense of what kind of wild gorilla could carry a man through the rainforest to the coast. Why would it do that? How would you be able to understand the language of the natives? It's unlikely that Descartes memorized Polish, that well if she was only 5 years old when she and her mother crashed. Besides, there are no natives of their tribes here for hundreds of kilometers around at all. All these statements and questions affected Jacob very much. Anna still managed to assure him that it was all just a game of his sick imagination. Listen, Jacob, said the girl, I realize now it is silly to assume such a thing in your condition. However, I will do it. Would you like to go out with me? After you're fully recovered, of course. Maybe we'll still have time before we leave for a date? Jacob smiled, not believing his luck. How much he wanted to get closer to this wonderful girl. And then it was as if he woke up from the anesthesia and even switched to you. Although it was rude. Wait, so you have Jim, right? Jim, he's in the past, Anna said firmly. In the past. I don't want anything to do with him anymore. You know, he cheated on me. Anna turned away and brushed tears from her eyes. There was an awkward silence. Jacob was digesting this information while Anna tried to calm her emotions. I'm sorry, only Jacob could only give out a tear rolled down Anna's cheek. Do you need to rest? She realized. I'll come back later. After her departure, Jacob's head was torn apart again, but no longer from pain, but from the confusion and complexity of the circumstances. He liked Anna very much, until he met Coco, but as they had already found out, no Coco had ever existed. The doctor came to see him again, and said that tomorrow morning they would be able to discharge him. Then a policeman came and spent a long time tediously writing some papers near his bed, asking various stupid questions together with a shoddy interpreter. Finally, it was time for bedtime and the exhausted patient. Finally, he was able to rest. The next morning, he was already standing at the front desk waiting for his discharge. He couldn't wait to go back to the hotel, change into clean clothes, wash himself properly, and leave this crazy country forever. Can you give me the document that the doctor gave you? Asked the girl behind the counter. Yes, now smiled the young man. He started in the pockets of his shorts, suddenly realized. Where's my camera? It was as if he had been hit with a gush of cold water. Had he lost such a precious and important thing in this damn jungle? Isn't that what you're looking for? The registrar girl asked him and pulled out his precious photos from somewhere. In the inventory it says that this bag was found with you on the beach. Anna informed him with a dazzling smile. Jacob frantically grabbed the camera, opened the monitor, and almost collapsed on the floor when he saw the photo. It was Coco, a real live Coco. And next thing you know, there they were, sitting on the grass together. Behind them are dark tropical trees, and above them, that magical starry sky. Jacob whistled. These pictures were sure proof that this whole story was real. He had neither dreamed it nor dreamed it. He wanted to shout and jump with happiness, but everyone would think he was crazy. What can I say? Nobody. No one believed his delusional stories. As soon as he was discharged, Jacob ran out of the hospital in full confidence that he would find his love. I will find her, the guy said to himself and walked out of the clinic. Jacob towards him, smiling dazzlingly, got out of the parked car. Anna, I've come for you, she informed him. She hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. He was dumbfounded by such a sudden appearance and behavior, also slightly embraced her. They got into the car and drove to the hotel. All the way he looked at his photos and came to the conclusion that they were truly magnificent. All the hotel staff and tourists gathered at the entrance to greet the traveler who had returned from the other side of the world. Anna, looking at this joyful meeting, she couldn't hide her tears. She didn't expect to see this handsome guy alive. In addition, she was very afraid that he would report to the police about inadmissible negligence on her part and demand compensation for the harm done to his life and health. Personally from her as a responsible person and from the travel agency. That's why she went to the hospital. That's why she offered him a date. She saw the way he looked at her the first day he arrived. She'd seen the way he'd fallen in love with her slender legs and other charms. But Jacob, carried away by his feelings and memories, did not even think about all this. The hotel staff was also very happy about the return of the missing guest. Everyone tried to do him something nice. The administration threw a fancy dinner with alcoholic drinks for the whole group. They were also partly to blame for the missing tourist. After all, it was the hotel that provided the jungle travelers with such flimsy trackers. Jacob tried to find out from the hotel staff where the Aboriginal settlement was located, but they only shrugged their shoulders. Either they really did not know the location of the village, or Jacob spoke English so badly. In any case, even after a couple of days, he still could not get anything from them. "Val, how are you?" asked him. Anna sat down at his table at dinner. "I'm great," thoughtfully answered the guy, taking another sip of wine. "And how are you? What about Jim?" "My lawyer is preparing the divorce papers for now." The girl frowned. This was clearly not what she wanted from her conversation with Jacob. "Have you thought about my proposal?" The guy was silent for a long time, looked at one point, and then woke up, and with the proposal to walk, to get better acquainted. Anna reminded me. She seemed very uncomfortable with this conversation. "I'm sorry, I don't think now is the time. I haven't quite recovered yet. You can see how absent-minded I am." He smiled guiltily at her. "It's okay, no problem." Anna smiled, and fled as quickly as possible. Jacob didn't care at all. He was only thinking about Coco and where he could find her. The young man decided to go where he came from, to the port. That was where it was full of different merchants. They surely had to know where the natives lived. Getting out of bed early in the morning, he went to the cab he had ordered the night before. The night before, he had arranged with a man to take him to the harbor. But the man was not there now. "Who are you looking for?" asked Anna, passing by. "Yes," stammered Jacob. The cab driver didn't see. So he left on an excursion to the mountains. It is worth telling here that as soon as it became known about the missing tourist in Anna's group, she was immediately fired from her job. However, she was forced to stay here until the general departure. Shortly afterward, she learned of her husband's infidelity. All this broke her down. The only escape from her moping was Jacob. There was something about that guy, but he turned his back on her too. That's when she decided to win him over herself. To do this, she discouraged the driver to go with Jacob, saying that he was sick. And now she planned to take the driver's seat herself. "It's just that we made a deal with him yesterday. He didn't say anything about a tour," Jacob explained. "Let me take you where you need to go." Anna offered with a smile. "I have the keys." From where they gave them. "Even when I was a tour guide, I will leave. They will take away." Jacob did not understand her game and agreed. They fairly quickly rushed to the pier. Here the guy thanked his companion and asked to leave him alone. Anna was greatly disappointed by this, but he did not even pay any attention to her mood and went in search of information about his beloved. At the harbor, a local boy was also mistaken. Apparently the same age as Jacob himself, he was selling various national souvenirs from a trade to tourists. "Hey, Frente," I said hello to him. Jacob in English. "Do you know where to be a village of local people?" "Village people. There's a village guy," cheerfully answered the merchant and waved his hand. "No, you do not understand me. People and other people," tried to explain Jacob. "Other people." "No, I do not. Guy buy goods, here spoons, mugs take." "No thanks," frustrated, muttered Jacob, and headed to the next vendor, bearded a man with a red cape on his shoulders. "I have only the finest quality fabrics." This bearded man beckoned to the customers. Jacob approached him under the guise of an ordinary customer. "Hello," greeted the merchant. "What do you want, dear?" "You help me village to the jungle. Where is the village?" "I do not understand you," said the man already without any enthusiasm, "but you know the village." "1 second. Jacob pulled out of his pants pocket the very picture. "How much to know this girl?" "No, that's your fiancée. Beautiful." "I hope so," Jacob thought to himself. "Are you looking for a village in the jungle?" Suddenly asked someone's voice from behind. Jacob turned around to look at him. A swarthy, low-statured man was watching. "Do you want to find the village of the people?" He repeated his question. "Yes," almost jumping for joy, shouted the boy. "Come with me." Jacob gladly obeyed. They walked through the entire makeshift market and came out to a dilapidated wooden house. Immediately he shouted to them around it were a yard of stroller legs that tourists rode on. The teenagers in the 10th tree were sitting and playing cards with several men of obviously gangster appearance. All of them were swarthy and black-haired, talking loudly, arguing and giving the impression of people who were experienced and smitten. One of them was much taller than the others, and muscular. "This guy needs help," said the guide Jacob, turning to his acquaintances. They looked at them grimly without saying a word and went back to their game. Yes, began Jacob cautiously. I'm looking for an Aboriginal village, he said in Polish, and immediately scolded himself for being stupid. He had forgotten that English was barely spoken here. What was his surprise when one of the seated men answered him in Polish? Aborigines, you say? Well, there are some here, only far up high in the mountains. You speak Polish, without hiding his surprise, exclaimed Jacob. Yes, I understand that you are very surprised. But here, you know, son, what surprises me most of all, that timidly asked Jacob, your abnormal interest in these damned savages? What do you need them for? Here Jacob had nothing else to do but to tell them the story of his unhappy love, his fragile happiness, which he gained and immediately lost. So you need to find this girl? The formidable tall man concluded. Jacob nodded affirmatively. How much do you want? He asked. The man, after thinking a bit with his cronies in his own language. Pay 100,000 and we'll take you to these crazy savages, he said. And don't think of haggling, or you'll fly upside down right there, and he jabbed his hand carelessly toward the dock. Jacob didn't even flinch. He did not spare any money to find his happiness. That's why he easily made such a promise, deciding to give his camera to the counselors as payment on his return. It's a very expensive device, the boy convinced them. You will be able to get much more than 100,000 of your money for it. The local leader didn't take anyone's word for it and dragged Jacob to a nearby pawn shop. There they confirmed to him that they would give him 100,000 even as collateral. The satisfied bandit gave his consent. He and Jacob took the camera to the pawn shop. Each received 50,000 and the owner gave them a receipt. Jacob left the other half of the amount with the pawn shop owner in the safe. If I come back alive, I will give you everything as agreed, the guy told his escort. If we can take the girl with us, you will also get the camera, and that's another 500,000 for your money. Now all that was left to do was to wait until morning, because that's when the small group decided to move out. They met at the same place at the earliest possible hour. All were dressed appropriately for the occasion. Everyone had a weapon, and Jacob was glad of it. In the jungle, it was really necessary. After all, not only wild animals lived there, but also wild people. Now with such a team, Jacob was not scary neither snakes, nor gorillas, nor crazy chiefs. On their way, they met poisonous cobras, huge spiders, and even a tiger. But all these animals bypassed them. No battle was fought, no horrors happened. Jacob decided it was a good omen. We were almost there, and the guy pronounced the muscular bandit. Toward evening, when tired from the long walk, Jacob was ready to fall over nothing and never move again. But I don't think you'll be so welcome in this village. He grinned. Al looked at Jacob and saw familiar places. The same clearing where they had sat with the doll, gazing at the stars. And there was the familiar village. It was still quite light, so a lot of people came out to see what kind of strangers came to their territory. At their head, of course, was the old chief. He gave Jacob a scornful look. Why have you come to us? You rascal again, growled the chief. The guide immediately translated these words for the customer into Polish. Tell him I have come for Coco, said Jacob. The boy wants to talk to your daughter, the interpreter said. Jacob himself caught the old chief's menacing and judgmental gaze. No, Coco's father cut him off. The men had foreseen this option and pointed their pistols in the direction of the gathered tribe. It saw the girl. The leader commanded about the counselors. The chief made a terrible grimace and shook his staff. All the male savages immediately thrust forward their spears and looked very belligerent. The chief began to prepare something in his own language, and so quickly that even the interpreter could not keep track of his curses and swear words. He didn't need to. He raised his pistol and shot into the air more quickly. There were screams of shrieking women, children, armed with spears and bows. The crowd drew these theses and prepared to shoot at the uninvited guests. Suddenly, from behind their backs, Coco sprang forward. She was amazed and angered by the reappearance of Jacob. She ran up to the chief and quickly said something to him, gesticulating desperately. The chief nodded and made a sign to his men. Put down your weapons. Let's go. Dahl grabbed Jacob by the arm and pulled him to the side. "What the hell are you doing here, forget you?" Jacob replied in a gentle voice and smiled stupidly. All the colors of light and the words he had prepared for this meeting just slipped out of his head. He missed this girl so much. As soon as he saw her, he drowned in those stray eyes of Coco's. "I want to take you away from here," he blurted out. "You don't belong here." That's how she made an impenetrable face and straightened proudly. "And why do I want you to be my begging wife?" said the lad. "I will take you away with me to my homeland. These people, these savages. Do you really want to live your whole life like this?" She lowered her eyes and was silent for a minute. The villagers and the chief himself watched the whole scene, but they did not understand a single word of the lovers' conversation. Finally, Coco raised her gaze to Jacob again. "Jacob, you're a very nice guy, and I really like you. But I can't do this. My family's here now, a family that doesn't respect you, that kills people. Just like that. It's nothing like that." Coco objected. "You don't know anything about our lives. You think just because you've been here a couple days you're an expert." She grinned. "All families have their skeletons in the closet. But I'm not leaving here ever. These people sheltered my mom and me when we were almost dying from our wounds, hunger, and thirst. She often told me how cruelly my own father had treated her, how she had suffered in that distant cold country. She and I were flying to visit distant relatives, and she bought those tickets with her last money because we had nowhere else to go. But it's a very long story, and you don't need it." Coco cut herself off. "All you need to know is this. This is where my mom and I found love, care, found a real family. This is her grave. Besides, here is my Bon, my boy, whom I raised as my own son. You intend to take him with you too?" she asked ironically. Jacob was suppressively silent. "I can never leave this place," she said firmly. "And to be honest, you acted like the ultimate idiot. If you'd stuck to the rules, none of this would have happened. You were welcomed as a guest, and you violated our laws of hospitality, Coco." "What are you talking about?" Stunned spoke Jacob. "Wake up. Come with me. I beg you. Let's go away from these filthy savages who stuffed your pretty head with all kinds of nonsense. You're a Russian girl. I'll take you home. You don't belong here, please." "This is where I belong," she declared, glaring angrily. "I'll be a stranger there, and you'll be the first to reject me." "Did my mom tell me how conniving men can be?" she added, and her lips quivered. "I saw you with her." Suddenly she added and turned away, looking like a hurt child. Who was Jacob's apex with? With that gorgeous hottie outside the hospital. "I saw you being taken away and followed." "Where did she put you?" Said Coco quietly that morning when you left the hospital. "She kissed you and you hugged her and laughed. You've got it all wrong." Coco tried to change her mind to Jacob. "Anna and I are just friends. She's my guide, and she's married." Finally, he found himself and gave out this argument, hoping that it will sober up the jealous Coco. Married. She was amazed. Mom was right. In your horrible country, all people are promiscuous and lustful scoundrels. Yes, in our country, a married woman doesn't even dare to go near another man. And you? How dare you embrace her when you know she has a husband? "Go away. I don't even want to know you," she sang, like a snake, and spit at his feet. Jacob was completely confused. He looked at the girl for a long time and could not understand whether she was making a show in front of her father or telling the truth. But Coco's look testified that all this was said in earnest. She does not understand another life, will not leave her tribe or her mother's grave. A terrible blow to the young man's very heart. But it was her choice, and he had no right to judge her. He sighed heavily, turned and made a sign to his mercenaries. "Let's go. Goodbye, Coco." Sadly, he said to his beloved, standing already beside the leader. For the last time, he plunged into her bottomless eyes. It was less than 24 hours before the departure of the cruise liner. Jacob lay in his hotel room, unable to find a place to sleep. He thought only of her hair, her lips, her eyes. He wanted to see again, even for a brief moment, this mysterious girl who had been through so much. If she wasn't going to be with him, then why was she helping him? Why had she saved his life? Perhaps he would never be able to understand her choices. God, why is everything so complicated in this life? Jacob took his camera and dialed a familiar number. "Hello," answered a thin girl's voice. "Anya, would you like to come with me to this last dinner?" "Yes, okay. I'll be right back to pick you up." He ended the call, shook his head, looked at himself in the mirror, and with a determined step, walked out of the room towards his destiny. Quite a few years had passed since then. Jacob left his boring office. He graduated from a specialized college, then university, and became quite famous and well-paid photojournalist. In achieving this goal, he was greatly helped by the very photo he took in the distant tropical jungle, and of course, his parents who always supported their son in everything. "Honey, I made you breakfast." The gentle voice of his wife reached here and from the kitchen. Jacob yawned once more and got out of bed. It had been a long time since he had lived with his parents. Now he had a beautiful modern apartment in a new building. Pulling up, Jacob entered the kitchen. On the high chair sat his 1-year-old son Arseny. He was already eating his morning porridge. Of course, he was not particularly good at it, but his loving mother helped him in everything. "Sit down, Jacob. Cheesecakes already. And here you go." On the table appeared a large dish, full of appetizing golden. Krugliakov Jacob picked up a couple, put to his plate. "Very tasty, my dear." What did he throw his wife in the cheek? "How'd you sleep? You came back to work so late last night. What do you want?" The man shrugged. He sipped the coffee his wife had carefully brewed in the large kitchen. As always, the TV was on in the background, of course, on the news channel. Suddenly, Jacob saw vaguely familiar terrain on the screen and turned up the volume. Cautiously, he said, "Leaving the cup 3 hours ago, a terrible tsunami had struck the coast and nearby areas of Central and West Africa." Commented on the terrifying footage. Announcer. "Severely affected the territory of Cameroon. Many settlements, tourist complexes, and other objects of infrastructure will be washed off the face of the earth. In addition, a large mudslide came down from the mountains near the village of Buda." The footage kept flashing on the screen. The disaster-stricken area, familiar to both of them, looked terrible. And what was happening there now looked more like an apocalyptic movie than anything else. "Jesus," that's what the shocked Anna said, and sat down on a chair, staring at the TV screen. Jacob's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. The head of the newsroom was calling. "Saw the broadcast," he shouted. "Immediately we load everything and leave for the site. The whole group should be ready in half an hour tops." At 12, he booked the flight. Jacob was not used to such situations. An alarming backpack was always waiting in the check room. His wife had long since accepted the schedule of her husband and did not ask unnecessary questions. After 15 minutes, Jacob fully equipped, fully kissed goodbye to his wife and son, and quickly walked out of the apartment. On the spot, the film crew arrived without much incident. Fortunately, the nearest convenient airport was not affected by the rampant elements. At the ramp, they were already waiting for a special vehicle that could take the correspondents to the border with the danger zone. Further, they flew by helicopter, flying over the very places where in his youth he had experienced so many exciting and tragic events. The man involuntarily gave himself over to the memories. They were flying over the very epicenter of the disaster. Piles of garbage and all sorts of debris that had once been neat houses, hotels, shopping centers, and hospitals were mixed with earth, trees, and dirty water. Rescue efforts unfolded all around. Poor survivors wept over the bodies of loved ones. The once beautiful coastline no longer existed. The crew took many good photos and recorded a great report from the scene. The company management will be pleased with the sudden anger, Jacob thought. He hated this part of his job with all his soul, having to do business on someone else's misfortune. Besides, it wasn't the laying thoughts that haunted him, it was Coco. How long had it been? He hadn't thought of her. And her village wasn't that far from here either, folks. "We urgently need to get up into the jungle," he announced to his colleagues. "What's that for?" The leader of this expedition was indignant. "Our work is almost done. There we will make stunning footage." Jacob didn't stop. "I know what I'm saying. I was once long ago of these places. Here in these mountains still exists completely secluded, and a village of natives may still exist, he added, mentally with sorrow. That's not where you took that crazy picture you got paid so much money for. The coworker perked up. Jacob nodded silently with a bow, commanded his boss, and began to rush the employees. We need to get to the Dan village before dark. The jungle was also very badly damaged. Here and there you could see huge trees uprooted, huge layers of soil, giant rocks. Forest fires were raging all around. Jacob was struggling to gaze at the terrain and trying to check the maps here. Shouted he finally into the speaker of his helmet. Hoeing down. The small creek was now out of its banks and looked like a real stormy stream. From far away from the Aboriginal camp came loud cries, groans, wounded, and mooing of frightened animals. With difficulty finding a place to land. An experienced pilot managed to land the helicopter here. Correspondents rushed to the scene in droves. Jacob was not filming anything. His face was focused and frowning. All around was the same as on the coast. The rubble, the debris, the dead bodies had oriented themselves a bit. He hurried to where he thought the posts around the fire had once stood. The vivid earlier memories had already been erased, and his panic fear of this place was long gone. Jacob searched the whole territory of the destroyed village, lumping into people's corpses and debris, and tried to find his Coco alive or dead, to at least give her a decent burial. Then a heavy stomping sounded behind him. Jacob stirred. He recognized those heavy footsteps. From somewhere from behind the rubble jumped out a huge, giving bomb. Jacob exclaimed. It was undoubtedly Bombu, only very much more mature. A real giant. He was carrying a breathless female body in his arms. Jacob ran swiftly toward the beast, regardless of the warning shouts of his colleagues. In the caverns of the beast, he saw his Coco. It was absolutely certain. It was her. The same hair, the same delicate features of the deer face. The woman was unconscious, a deep gash shone on her neck. One arm dangled powerlessly precisely on a thin thread. Jacob's heart clenched painfully. Coco, my darling. Bombu carefully placed his precious burden on the ground, lowered himself beside her, and suddenly a terrifying blaze. Hammering themselves in the chest with long furry paws with things. Jacob felt for a pulse, hurt often and interrupting the first aid kit with all his might, he yelled. We can still save her. One of his friends ran a little closer and threw the first aid kit, fearing the giant gorilla. Jacob frantically tore open the packages, trying to do something for Coco, but it was already quite clear to him that they had arrived here too late. Suddenly, in the folds of the fabric of Coco's clothing, he caught some sort of movement, a soft cry. Hello, the woman spoke weakly and opened her eyes. She tried to find her baby with her eyes. There she was. Jacob held the wrapped baby up to her face. Look, she's all right. Jacob with one lip sang Coco in surprise. Jacob, take her, take her. She wanted to say something else, but she couldn't. A thin trickle of blood dripped from the corners of her lips. The doll twitched her whole body and closed her bottomless eyes forever. Jacob howled just as he had just roared a bomb-bull jab not from Coco. The astonished coworkers crowded in the distance, gazing at this heartbreaking scene. They chatted quietly. Someone even wanted to take a few pictures, but the head of the expedition abruptly stopped these attempts. I'll keep her safe. Dear Coco, wiping away tears, said the man. Goodbye. The big gorilla carefully picked up the body of his foster mother from the ground, and in a few leaps ran away into the jungle. Honey, I'm home. Jacob opened the door and entered the apartment. How are you? Towards him ran out two cheerful, naughty children, a boy and a girl almost the same age. Daddy, Daddy, what did you bring us? Did they hang around their father's neck, climbing into his bags or pockets? Val, it's about time. How was the trip? His smiling wife came over and kissed him. Anna, it's fine. I brought you some presents from Australia. Dad, you brought me a kangaroo. A little girl about 3 years old asked hopefully. Dark-skinned, pretty with huge azure, like seawater. Her eyes are inexpensive. He smiled and sat her on his lap. "But I brought you this. Look, I like it." "Thank you." The little girl brightened and skipped off to play with the new thing. In the evening, Jacob enjoyed the family coziness and watched how cheerfully play together their children with Anya. The wife was not easily given such a decision of her husband, and there was a time when they almost divorced because of this situation. But now it's all in the past. Little Alice, that's what he decided to call her, managed to melt the resentful heart of her adoptive mother, and she took her into the family and began to bring her up as her own daughter. Finally, Jacob was completely happy. He no longer felt guilty about Coco. She had once saved his life, and now he returned the favor. When his daughter grows up, he will be sure to tell her a wonderful story about the plane crash, secluded in the jungle, a village of its inhabitants. About a naive boy who underwent all possible horrors, lost in the jungle, and then met a beautiful Set and fell in love with her without memory. He will tell her everything, show her old photos, and then she will definitely remember her wonderful and heroic mother.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Daniel pulled his heavy bag out of the dusty, smelly bus. He saw himself, his old bag, and the entire interior of the gasoline and hot dust-stained bus as dirty, wrinkled, and in need of immediate washing. The steps of the old bus were spattered with seed husks and small scraps of paper. Daniel slid his bag down them, kicked it squeamishly into the thick side, shaking it off automatically, and wiped away the sweat. What a heat wave this year! The passengers on the bus were drenched in sweat, but at least there was some breeze blowing through the open hatch, though the smell of gasoline booze was unbearable, and gusts of wind cooled people's faces. And here, in the middle of a huge field, where only a lonely sign stood, there was nothing to breathe. The heat is standing, in the face carries the hot smell of the field, on which some places are already becoming obvious splotches, so burned out grass under the scorching sun. And the yellowing grass and pathetic bushes on the roadside looked almost as uncomfortable and unkempt as the bus that had just left, hiding in the clouds of dust. Here it was his native side, such a familiar and yet forgotten place. What a sin to say! It looked rather shabby, his native village, there on the hill, and it was still 1.5 kilometers to carry the bag to it. He wanted to get here as soon as possible. After all the things he had seen in the past few years, Daniel was not interested in this landscape, or the village streets, which stretched from top to bottom and were clearly visible from here. He was a practical man. Rather than reminisce about unfulfilled dreams, he should think better of where to stay. He didn't want to go straight to Lucy's house. Daniel followed the path that led to the center of the village. His second cousin lived there. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years, if not more, and there wasn't much friendship. But his sister might let him stay there. It was good that Abigail didn't like his ex-wife Lucy, so maybe it would work out. Daniel recognized the old woman who was coming toward him at once. A tall, heavy figure approached from across the street, leaning heavily on a stick and limping on both legs. There was no mistaking her for anyone else. It was their neighbor, the terror of the whole village, strict and fair Clara. Since she had worked all her life as the head of a dairy farm, she was used to giving orders to milkmaids and half-drunk cattlemen with a thunderous voice. She was also known for the fact that she was not afraid of any superiors, and she always told everyone in the eyes what she thought, and she thought in the collective farm way, in the owner's way, so that everything was fair. That's how she defined her attitude to life. She had no husband, so she lived on her own, taking other people's sorrows and troubles as her own. She was a true mother commander, masculine-looking, with a loud voice. On her feet, Mrs. Clara, she hadn't even changed. She was a flint. Daniel grinned to himself. "Oh, Baba Clara. Great. Not dead yet?" cheerfully called the former neighbor. "Why should I die? The state owes me a pension for one more life." Granny Clara replied in a non-hospitable manner. "And whose are you, so cheerful? I don't recognize you. What are you doing, woman, Clara?" "I'm Daniel, your neighbor. Lucy's husband? That's how it is. He's here, so he's here in the dust." It was obvious that Granny Clara was not happy to see me. She frowned, looked at the city's handsome man. "Well, yes, here he is. How long can one travel abroad? We have to get on with our life in our native country." Daniel tried to make the conversation positive, but the old woman had been known for her iron temper before, and over the years she must have hardened even more. It was not easy to get her to be cordial. "You could have gone on traveling and not come here. You have nothing to show off, and what about Lucy and the baby?" "Huh?" The grandmother waved her hand and even spat in his direction. "You should go back to your foreign land. You must have lived well there. For so many years you have never visited your native son. Shameless." She went on her way, muttering curses and curses under her breath. No matter how Daniel had prepared himself for the various options for his return, he wasn't ready for this. It was not pleasant, of course. The very first one, that woman Clara, she ruined his mood. Daniel had never gotten along with her before. She'd always looked at him like a wolf, even when they'd been living badly with Lucy. Lucy never complained or whined. Daniel knew that for a fact. His wife was thin and weak-looking, but she had a lot of patience. I don't know why the old woman looked at him so unpleasantly. Yes, his homeland did not welcome him warmly. Daniel grunted and walked on, almost dragging his bag up the hill. The closer he got to his goal, the taller he grew, the more elastic his gait, and he carried his bag as if it were full of fluff. The man tried to look good. "Everything is fine with me, and my business is excellent, and my mood is good. You see, I'm in a great mood." His whole look screamed. The wide smile he had on his face looked like the mask of a happy man. The street he was walking down after years of absence appeared narrower, more unassuming than when he was a child. But through the front gardens, tall golden orbs and mallows were also going crazy. These unpretentious flowers were familiar attributes of his native village from childhood, and Daniel felt something stirring in his soul. The front garden of his native house had looked exactly the same when he went to school for the first time as a 7-year-old boy, and it was exactly the same bouquet of golden orbs that he had held in his skinny hands, shyly holding out to the beautiful and slender teacher. Is the teacher, whom the 13 first graders adored with all their hearts, still alive? They caught her every word, and at recess they tried to come as close as possible to her desk to breathe in the wonderful smell of her hair. They smelled of divine toilet soap. For the village kids who washed themselves gray and thrifty, once a week on Bath Saturday, that smell embodied both the distant city, from which Evelyn came after the Institute, and their own future, unclear but beautiful, like the young teacher herself. Daniel remembered his first A's, of which he had been so proud, his mischievous friends. He had always strived to be one of the best, not in studies, but in sports. If he failed in sports, he had to win in dancing or checkers. Evelyn left, and so the studies became uninteresting. The gym teacher who was in their school got married and stopped coming on a motorcycle from the district center. Daniel abandoned sports, checkers, but in checkers he could still now beat a dozen good opponents. But what good would that do? As quickly as he lost interest in everything, he burned out as soon as he achieved a little success, and so it happened with Lucy. While he was courting her, he tried hard, he tried his best, but as well as he could, as it was customary in their area. Lucy was considered to be almost the first beauty, and to win her meant for Daniel to win another victory. He did, he tried. He walked with pleasure, remembering his younger years. He had lived well in his native village in his youth. What can I say? But then life did not go well, and Daniel was carried away somewhere, dreaming of a great future, temptations again. Here is the sister's house, Platbins painted blue and white, in the front garden according to custom flowers order. Abigail's parents always lived well and were excellent hosts, so Abigail is in them too, a real homeowner. Or maybe she's been married for a long time. Maybe she has kids. Well, blood is not water. Daniel will put up with Daniel for a while, and her sister's husband, and their kids. What can you do? Your kin, it said. Daniel stood up straight and opened the gate. You live well. He smiled broadly at the young, full woman standing on the porch. Receive your guest, sister. Abigail greeted him with a look of surprise or incredulity. This was someone she hadn't expected to see on her doorstep, hadn't expected, and hadn't wanted. Not at all. What brings you here, Daniel? She gave him her hand reluctantly as he came over to hug her. What are you doing here? Well, so native places, you have to build a life, the years go by. Again he repeated, as if justifying his arrival, from somewhere taken, as if memorized phrase. But come in since you're here. Abigail did not look at him kindly either, but went forward, opening the door to the house for Daniel. The hut was as clean and bright as ever. Daniel remembered the comfort of Abigail's home. Everything was in good working order, nothing in need of repair, no ruin or helpless woman's hand. Daniel noticed that at once, with that familiar rustic look. There was a portrait of Abigail with a handsome, curly-haired man hanging on the wall next to his parents' pictures. Who's that? Your man? Unceremoniously, he pointed him out to Abigail. Handsome. Have you lived here long? Is he at work? We live as long as we have to. The sister replied dryly. He's on shift for a month at a time. Daniel was a little upset about her unknown husband, but she kept her spirits down. Abigail, but I'll stay with you for the first time. Because, you know, there's no telling. He waved his hand somewhere uncertain. And what are you thinking of going to Lucy? Abigail shook her hands in amazement. I don't know, Daniel, but I'll tell you straight. You were mean to them. I wouldn't go near a man like that if he'd done that to me. Indignation was written all over the woman's face. She even turned away to the window, neither to eat nor to drink tea. She did not offer her brother. You'll live a couple of days, so be it. And there, I'm not your friend, and I'm not an advisor, you know. What you've done, no one is allowed to do. And Abigail looked her brother straight in the face. Abigail, but why you? Why did I have to ruin my life? Daniel sighed. The last thing he needed was a lecture from Abigail. Abigail laughed. So you've fallen out of favor and decided to be a husband and father again. Well, I am a husband and father, and what's past is past. I'm not a boy anymore. I've seen life. I've seen different people. I've traveled. I understand the value of real life, Abigail. Daniel was getting hot. He had not expected to take his sister's reproaches so seriously. You can't change the past now, and I have big plans. I even have a lot of good plans. I hear that Lucy is doing very well. Abigail grinned as she listened to Daniel's outpourings and couldn't help herself. Is that why you came back? Is the kitty licking the butter? Yeah. Right. Lucy's doing very well now, and she's cured Mason, and she's got a new house, and she's got a lot of suitors. So I think you're gonna have to suck it up. You don't know how much Lucy loved me, do you? Kissing my feet on the ground to keep me going. Of course she believed you, simple as that. She got married. She was going to live well. She gave birth to a son for you, you fool. Abigail wiped her eyes, remembering vividly her own worries about Lucy and Mason. Don't be so hard on me, sister, Daniel said peacefully. I'll stay with you for a few days and look around. You'll see how happy she'll be when she finds out I've decided to go back to them. Yeah, right? Abigail was outraged. You've been gone 10 years. What are you hoping for? Lucy, she's kind. Daniel smiled crookedly, convincing himself first. She'll be glad to see me. You're a fool to be happy with you. Abigail cut him off. You're mean, Daniel, really mean. No matter how you justify yourself, you're not a man. We'll figure it out. Daniel protested. I was not the last man there either. I worked at the construction site. Do you know how I worked? Ask anyone. I worked hard. No one had Abigail to ask about him, and there was no reason to. She knew perfectly well who she was dealing with, lying and deceiving himself as always. He seemed to talk himself into believing his own words. He protested and went back to persuading himself. You're Abigail. Remember, I'm a handyman. I can do anything if I want to. The main thing is to set a goal. If I have a goal, I'll achieve it. That's just the way I am. Daniel looked at his little sister and tried not to notice her judgmental, purely womanly, a little pitying look, and it was unclear whether Abigail actually felt a little sorry for him, or whether she was sorry that he was really her relative, a third cousin, a brother. And he again pretended to himself that he had not heard, but he had. He didn't believe his stupid sister. What did she know about people? People like him, purposeful, seeking, and what was his opinion? His sister sat him down at the table, cut lard, warmed soup, brought a table full of herbs from the garden. Daniel enjoyed plump cucumbers only from the bed, tomatoes cracking from their own juice, crisp onion stalks, and praised his sister. Well, Abigail, you're just like your mother. Aunt Nina was a famous vegetable gardener all her life. It was not for nothing that she worked in vegetable growing on the farm for so many years. Even my mom didn't have such tomatoes, even though Aunt Nina used to grow them. What a hostess you are! Abigail, indifferent to flattery, sat sadly. Her face never brightened. Don't they feed you like this in the cities? She did not lower her mocking tone. When I left, I had never eaten such lard and pickles. Shoeing, Daniel said nonchalantly, my native land, it's yielding. Little by little my sister thawed. Daniel, you haven't found happiness in distant lands. She sighed contentedly. Lucy, your Lucy, she left too. Yes, she didn't settle down either. How did she leave? Where? Daniel choked and stared at Abigail, froze with a cucumber in one hand and a spoon in the other. Chew on that, or you'll choke on it. Abigail looked at him with annoyance. She came back later. There were all sorts of rumors, but nobody knows anything. You drove off with your tail between your legs, but Lucy was as if her soul had been taken out of her. She never left the house, never talked to anyone. She lived in lockdown, then she moved away. For 5 years we didn't hear a word about her. We'd already forgotten her. But she came back. She came back 5 years later to your house and immediately started to build a new house on the plot. Daniel was silent, sitting there with a cucumber in his hand. A new house? He only asked in astonishment. That's it. She lives with Mason in the old one, and next to it she builds a big one, just like a palace. You can admire it. She hired builders from somewhere far away, not local. Ours would at least know something, but these swarthy ones don't even speak our language. Moldavians? They live right there, at Lucy's, in the anteroom. Is it really true that nobody knows anything? Daniel asked. No. People went crazy at first. Where were you all this time? Where did the money come from? How did you get it together? They tried to ask questions, but they wouldn't say anything. How is she? Doesn't she go out for bread? What does she feed the workers? She rarely goes to the local stores. She goes to the city. Despite her model-like appearance, Lucy was a quiet and modest girl. All the girls in the village were big, tall and overweight, blood and milk. Noisy, vocal local girls could hurt the unwanted groom with a strong word and stand up for themselves, and if necessary, to scoff and hard to get their own way. Among them and the newcomer was like a sparrow in a flock of crows, small and not loud. Daniel wanted just such a bride, and it was not hard to choose. She was the only one to whom his heart lay. What do you see in that pale marshmallow? Mother grumbled. She can't milk a cow. She can't draw water. She's a weak girl. She's of no use in the farm. There's Doris. She has tits like a dairy cow and strength like a man. My father is in charge of the grain mill. That's why the house is full. If it's built that way, my brother is a forester. I'd marry her. I wouldn't be in trouble. But that girl, Why do I need Doris, Mom? Daniel laughed. We already have cows. I don't have to milk her. I need a wife, so I won't be ashamed to take her out. Not a horse. I'm not going to ride it. I'm going to live. How are you going to live? With a city fashionista. She probably can't even melt a stove. She's got one too. Daniel didn't listen to his mother. He liked Lucy, and her gait was smooth. He looked at her 100 times when she walked past their house from the library, and gray eyes, so big that you can drown, also looked, what a sin to say. But Lucy herself went away quickly. You can't talk to her. You can't hug her like your girls. She was very strict, but he liked that she didn't let anyone near her. One look as if threw the guys away. If anyone dared to laugh, to press in a joke in a corner of the club, hapless suitors were embarrassed and withdrew quickly, until friends did not notice the failure and did not ridicule. Daniel had been looking for an approach to Lucy for a long time. He went to the library as if he were on duty. He flipped through a lot of magazines at a long table, tried to talk, but only the girl answered in one word, short and clear. Daniel gradually got used to the printed word, just not a fool, studied not worse than everyone else. He was also well regarded at school, and he turned out to be a good electrician. Again, not dirty work, not near cattle, for example. He wore clean clothes, was proud of his specialty, in any place people like him are needed. He used to read, and Lucy used to give him books. And you, Daniel, have you read about McCluco McClay? You're always looking at travel magazines. Maybe you'd like it? And she held out The Man from the Moon. I read it. We discussed the book. From that book, their friendship began. You to me, Lucy, beautiful, more similar find a book? He asked, smiling. You have a talent for librarianship. Immediately see into the root, understand who is interested in what, and continued to shower the girl with compliments. I must say, his praise was heartfelt. He really saw in Lucy only good, and Lucy, bookish soul, finally saw in him, as it seemed to her, an interesting interlocutor with whom you can talk. At first, as usual, the conversations revolved around the books they had read, and Daniel was sly, trying his best not to give away his uneducated nature, not giving the impression that he was hearing about many things for the first time. More on that later. What only they did not talk about, fall and winter evenings, in an empty reading room. To tell the truth, This library was not such a popular and crowded place. Gone were the days when half of the reading room was occupied by young guys who were happy to sit at newspapers and magazines until the start of the movie. Regular readers, really keen book lovers, went in the afternoon. Children from school were also brought in during school hours or right after school, and then the quiet hall was filled with children's hum. Printed editions on the tables were scattered in all directions, under the children's quick hands. Children would come in whole classes, talking and laughing, and on such occasions Daniel would leave at once to return in the evening when Lucy had finished her work and was going home. It was especially good for Daniel to be here in bad weather. There were no people, no one walking in the rain or blizzard to the library. Outside the window of blizzard or rustling rain, you could hear someone slapping on the puddles, and the library was warm, the radiators crackling cozily, and he and Lucy just the two of them. He was enjoying himself and sinfully proud. The prettiest girl in their village, there she was right next to him. If you wanted to, you could take her hand, stroke her blonde hair, and most importantly, you could stare at her as long as you wanted and admire the major movements of her hands, watch her speak, watch her lips part in a smile. About the big gray eyes, he would have liked to write poems, but only could not. He felt it all deeply, as it seemed to him, in his heart, but he could not tell about it, even if he died. "Lucy, let's go to the movies. They brought a good movie today," he said once he made up his mind. I must say, while they were talking about books, Daniel could still explain himself, but when it became clear that it was necessary to somehow move forward in the relationship, again confused. "Let's go," Lucy agreed unexpectedly quickly. "I saw the poster. I really wanted to see it. I'll come closer to the beginning and we'll go together." The guy was happy. After that, he was already considered a legitimate escort according to village customs, and Lucy did not recognize anyone except Daniel and did not want to recognize him. She had already, as it turned out, become imperceptibly accustomed to him. "You guy, you're getting there." His mother scolded him angrily at home. "Look, you'll be tormented with her. You'll do everything yourself, mark my word. Then don't take offense at me. I warned you, we need a strong woman to take care of the house, not this doll with books. Mom, stop your whining." Daniel snapped languidly. "I'll get married anyway, you know me." They continued such angry quarrels until spring. Finally, at one opportune moment, Daniel made up his mind and asked Lucy, "Why don't you introduce me to your parents? You know all my parents, you know all the people in the village, and you have already recognized me." "What parents, Daniel?" Lucy was surprised. "I'm from the orphanage. I have no one in the world, no relatives, no one. I can only introduce you to the director of the orphanage. She is a wonderful woman. She was like a mother to us. I always write her letters." Deep down, Daniel was even happy. Lucky, God forbid. No one would prevent them from living as they wanted. No one would interfere in their lives. No one would command them. He had had enough of his own mother. She teaches and teaches, she's exhausted. Mother surprisingly calmly perceived his decision to marry when she learned that the future daughter-in-law round orphan. "It's for the best," she said. "Ours will be ours our way, and she'll live her life." But Daniel immediately declared, "Well, no, we will live separately. With you will not boil the porridge. You with your moralizing will not give us peace. So, sorry. Goodbye. We'll come and help you. Just call us. But old and young should not live in the same house." "Wow, you raised a son." The mother wailed. "Why are we throwing you out on the street?" From time immemorial, a bride was brought to her mother and father's house. "I've made an agreement with the chairman There's an empty house near the board. Remember? They'll give it to us for the first time, and we'll buy it back from the village. Well, it's a nice house. Mother has accepted it. Don't forget your mother. Do you hear me, son? Heaven in a shalash, and their shalash was good, in the center of the village, even to run to his mother, to fix the fence or wipe the floors. The library is close. The young lived for 3 years without grief and worries. They seemed to live amicably. There were no reasons for quarrels. What else? Unless they had a baby to complete their happiness. And that was the stumbling block. Lucy got pregnant. She walked with shining eyes and quietly rejoiced at the upcoming happiness. But it turned out that Daniel did not dream of a child at all. Come on, Lucy, let's live for ourselves. Why do we need a baby now? We're still young. What are you doing? Lucy was amazed. What do you mean? Why have a baby? It's the most important thing in life. It's the most important thing in life. Yes, you'll have time to give birth 100 more times. Her husband is boiling. Now he's going to tie you up. Let's make a deal. You can go to the abortion. 5 minutes and you're free. Can you believe it? No, no way. Lucy cut me off. I've never had a family. I want a complete family so that my son or daughter has a father and a mother, a grandmother, relatives to be. Unknown heredity, childhood in an orphanage, it's all taken its toll, of course. And she was so depressed for the whole 9 months she carried the baby. Lucy was having a hard time. The pregnancy was complicated. Lucy was hospitalized several times. Daniel became depressed. The usual way of life threatened to be disrupted. Instead of a measured, comfortable life in his own pleasure, he would have to listen to the crying of the baby all night, to do something for him, and Lucy would not be his at all. Already now, just on the threshold of the troubles, he suffered so much that no one will not show a little. He's not groomed, not fed. My wife used to hang his ironed underwear on a chair after the bath, down to his t-shirt and socks, and now he washed on Saturday in his mother's bathroom, so he could hardly find the right clothes in the closet. I couldn't find socks, so I had to wash the dirty ones myself and wait for them to dry. Of course, I went to my mother's house for lunch, not with different Mirandas, as Lucy spoiled him, but still home food, normal. He grew up on it, and nothing happened to him. But he wanted beautiful, healthy dishes for his stomach. Daniel was used to variety, but his mother's old woman had a menu. Soup and potatoes in 3 kinds, fried, boiled, and baked. He would have slept at his mother's, but she talked too much. Daniel was getting tired of the boredom of old age, as he called it. The house was boring, uncomfortable. There was no one to talk to. The floors were dirty. There was dust on the tables and shelves. The mistress had been in the maternity hospital for 2 weeks. Finally, gradually, he got used to the fact that he now had a son, but he could not love the boy. Strange thing is that Daniel had once loved Lucy, as he himself thought, for real. He wanted to be always with her, admired her beauty, even took care of his wife as he could, bought gifts, for example. Lucy, with special love, put on a pink silk dress, which he brought her from the city. She remembered that summer day at the beginning of their life together. "Look what I ripped off for you at the department store." He shouted to his wife, who looked out the window, when he rode up to the house with a friend on a motorcycle. Even though I was on a business trip, I didn't forget about my beautiful wife. 100 women were looking at this dress, arguing, but I got it. And right on the street unfolded this dress of unprecedented beauty. Lucy just aghast and hugged her Daniel. He took care of the housing, and at first he arranged everything in the house. It is impossible to say that he was a bum or a drunkard. In the village, he was considered a smart and not at all lazy electrician, and he often came to his mother's house to fix the roof or the fence. And when Mason was born, something changed in Daniel. Jealousy of his own son overpowered his love for his wife. It is true that Daniel was not particularly warm-hearted before. He had no friendship with anyone. He only told his wife that he was with friends. In fact, he was so busy with himself that he had no interest or time for others. Lucy noticed a motherly, unkind attitude towards people. He saw faults first of all, and then she saw her son. He was lying apart from the perfectly intact booths, where the frightened but seemingly healthy children were sitting. It was later learned that they were only slightly bruised. Only Mason was injured. He was taller than the other kids, and although the merry-go-round had not even had time to gain height and spin up, just started to rise, the boy flew out of the cabin, unable to hold on to the handrails. He was lying on the lawn a little farther away, with his eyes closed and no sign of life. Son Mason! Lucy rushed to the child, about to take him in her arms, but was stopped by the attendant. "Don't touch it. Don't touch it. The doctor will come now. It's dangerous to lift him." Lucy understood nothing and stroked her son's cheek in horror. By the veins in his neck, she realized that the boy was alive while he was still alive. An ambulance pulled up. Lucy and Mason were taken to the hospital. Daniel, who approached, only had time to see Lucy get in with her son, and the car door slammed shut. Lucy, whose thoughts were occupied only with her son, did not think to wait or look for her husband. Time was golden. What happened here? Daniel rushed to the employees of the ride. "My son's in there. What's wrong with him?" "And my wife's in the ambulance. I saw her." "Calm down. He's alive." They were trying to calm him down. He let go of his hands and fell. "Your wife is unharmed. She went to the hospital with him." Once again, Daniel was alone. Mason regained consciousness, but his spine was damaged, and the boy could not get up or walk. Lucy was constantly with her son in the hospital. Daniel worked. The expenses were enormous. Lucy, completely dried up from worry, in one of the short visits home asked him, "Daniel, you'd better try to live more economically. We're going to need a lot of money. Reconstructive surgeries are expensive. Is there any hope that he will recover?" Daniel asked. "Maybe we're just kidding ourselves. The doctors are giving us a chance." It was obvious that Lucy herself had little faith in this, but she continued to fight for her son. Daniel tried. Money never hurts. He understood that well. He didn't like going to the hospital. He said he was tired at work. Lucy felt sorry for him. She was with the boy, let her husband rest. To look at the crippled child, the father could not and did not want. His estrangement from his son deepened. Again an empty house, again loneliness. He was tired, exhausted. There was no desire to go to his mother, tired of her grouchiness. The young man wanted warmth and comfort, a woman's care. When will it end? He was indignant when Lucy once again came to check the house and put in order, wash his clothes. "Well, I'm not at the resort." The wife was offended. "Do you want to go to the hospital, and I'll go to work?" She knew perfectly well that this would never happen, that Daniel looked like a fool. To lose the only thing he had left, his freedom. No, he couldn't empathize with his bedridden child of 3 years. In that time, Daniel had acquired a convenient mistress. Miranda worked as a clerk at a bakery in a neighboring town, and a couple of times Daniel had stopped by the bakery for a snack and encountered her feminine, greedy gaze. He felt he had nothing to reproach himself for. God knows he tried. For 3 whole years he had endured loneliness, lack of comfort. almost always alone without his wife. No one could stand it. How many times? He just turned 30, the age when you want to live. Now at every opportunity he went to Miranda, who always waited for him with a table set and pastels undone. And at home there's only work, money going to doctors and drugstores, a tired aging wife and a crippled son. More than once and more than twice, he tried to explain to Lucy that all this treatment is completely useless. Lucy, you understand, finally, if at once they could not do anything, then now you certainly will not be able to. Why are you wasting money? What are you saying, Daniel? He's our son. You have to grab every opportunity, you understand. Lucy was almost screaming. She, too, was on the verge, desperate. She came home from the hospital, hoping to get advice and support from her husband, but he looked indifferently away and mumbled, "I understand, but I don't understand why I have to work from morning till night, and I can't even buy new pants." Lucy was slightly taken aback. What is he talking about? She opened her closet and began to lay out a pile of his clothes in front of her husband. "Do you have nothing to wear? Aren't you afraid of God? I'm going to throw out all this old stuff." Daniel shouted, his nerves strained to the limit. "Are we a family or an infirmary? Am I married or not, after all? When are we going to have a normal life? We'll never live normally because you don't love your son." Shouted in his face Lucy, "You only care about yourself." The woman's heart had long ago cooled to this man, but by inertia, she continued to consider him a husband and bestowed all the signs of respect. What is there? She served him even now, when there was no longer any strength left. And when Daniel went to town a couple of days later, she was not surprised. "I'm going to visit my folks for a week," he said. "At least I'll get some rest." Lucy did not understand his action, but did not dissuade him from going. Something about her unknown kin flashed in her head, but she did not even pay attention to such trifles. What did they mean compared to what she and Mason were about to face? Daniel had already arrived at his perky barmaid's house in anticipation of the festivities. "Daniel," she cooed, "I finally have you. How long have I waited for you?" "Well, I'm not letting you go now." "Yeah, you won't." Daniel laughed, pleased with the warm welcome. "I'm a free bird. I love freedom. You can't bait me." "We'll see about that." Miranda purred, taking off his shirt and kissing him. "Maybe I will, or maybe you'll want to stay with me forever." "Oh, Miranda, you're a hot woman," Daniel whispered between kisses. "Do you want to deprive me of my last strength?" After a long lovemaking, supported by food and alcohol from the famous buffet, the luggers lazily discussed the situation. "Leave them alone," pulled Miranda. "The child is an invalid. They used to put such children in an orphanage, and your clutch will never be young and beautiful, Daniel. What do you need her for? Look at me." She stood up on the bed, stretched her bare arms toward him, stroked her thighs and looked languidly at him, urging him to appreciate her feminine virtues. Wow, how appetizing. Daniel laughed and drew her back into bed. Everything he was used to was here, everything he needed for a comfortable existence. Daniel was leaning more and more towards the option that Miranda had suggested. "Okay, Miranda, I'll go there. I'll settle some things, and I'll be with you forever." "Oh, Daniel," Miranda shrieked and hugged him with renewed vigor. "How wonderful! You and I will go to a faraway place where no one will bother us." 2 weeks later, Daniel returned home. How miserable it seemed to him now, their home together with Lucy. He looked around. Nothing was dear to him. Nothing was nice. Of course, they had already paid the full amount for the house, along with his wife. So Daniel reasoned that he would leave the house to Mason and Lucy, and he owed them nothing more. That's it. He said to himself firmly. That's it. He'd been going to Miranda's house for a year. No children, no relatives, a nice place to live. Why shouldn't he live there? She's dusting him off, and then we'll see if Miranda's right. They should go to some big construction site. They're not hard workers, of course, but they want the money. Daniel prepared for the conversation carefully. He waited until Lucy and her son went to the hospital for another doctor's appointment. He went through his belongings and carefully put them in his bag. He also counted the money that Lucy had collected for her son's treatment and carefully put it in his pocket. After all, he was the one who earned it, so what should he do? To show up empty-handed at Miranda's, as if he were a pauper and a beggar. He had everything ready when Lucy and Mason came back. Lucy looked at the suitcases right away. Are you going somewhere? You just got here. Yeah, Lucy, I'm leaving. Lucy was confused. What do you mean you're leaving? Where? I'm leaving you completely. Daniel even turned away, as if he was afraid to look in her direction. But I'm not alone. We have a family, a son. His wife looked perplexed, still not believing what was happening. I can't live like this anymore. How long can I live like this? Daniel atomized himself. I work, but no use. What do you mean no use? We have a house, a household. Here Mason healed. All the money I earn goes into a hole. No rest, no distractions, just work and hospitals. This is not the life I signed up for. Daniel began to grab the suitcases with shaking hands. He himself had not expected the farewell to be so difficult. Lucy, at last, began to realize that his scheme was quite serious. Looking at the suitcases at her feet, she said in a trembling voice, "And don't you feel sorry for your son?" Son, you've been with him since birth. But did it help him? All his life you pampered him, wiped his snot, and what happened? Again, Daniel remembered what was so unpleasant to him, to make it easier to leave. You were there for him then. Why didn't you save him? Why didn't you save him when he fell? Because of you, he became an invalid, a crippled son. Lucy couldn't take it anymore. How can you say that about your child? You two went to drink beer. No, to be near us then. How can you? She finally burst into tears, which had been in her eyes since the beginning of the conversation. I'm telling the truth. I pampered him, so he sits all day long. He'd be back on his feet by now if you hadn't dragged him to hospitals. There's no life. You say family. What kind of family are we? You're always going to doctors, and I'm alone. You work like hell, and you don't even have hot soup at home, let alone a family. How will we be without you, Daniel? Wailed Lucy, who could not understand her feelings and only cried. Will you go to work, Hal? Stop driving him back and forth. You can't get new legs. He'll sit alone. He's not a little boy. Finally, Daniel gave out all the things that had been driving him crazy for years. It was as if a long-standing boil had burst. How could it be, Daniel? Lucy asked through her tears. The doctor said today that in 3 months we will be admitted to a clinic in the capital. This is already a 100% guarantee that the treatment will help. They work miracles there. It's the same story again. Lucy, how can you not get tired of believing these charlatans? I've been working for years for their money. Enough. But we've waited so long for this, it's only a matter of time before Mason gets back on its feet. You'll see. No, I've had enough. Daniel firmly threw away his wife's hands that were reaching for him. Daniel, for God's sake, don't leave us in our hour of need. I won't say a word later. I won't reproach you. But help us now. It's only 3 months. Lucy sobbed and threw herself on her knees at his feet. He only looked down at her squeamishly. Don't make a scene, Lucy. You're not the first. You're not the last. You'll have an even easier time without me, lonely one." And he let out a hoarse laugh. How many times can you believe this nonsense? The exhausted wife continued to cry, sprawled on the floor near his feet. There was the familiar squeak of wheels on the uneven boardwalk, and out of the corner of his eye Daniel saw Mason pull up in a wheelchair. "Mom, don't. Let him go." Daniel yanked his leg out of Lucy's hands and stepped toward the threshold, stopping. "I took the money there. I was the one earning it. That's why I took it. I have to start somewhere too. I'm leaving you the house." He stood there for a while, thought about it, decided to make a final threat. "Don't file for alimony, or I'll sue you for half the house." Lucy sobbed with more despair, and he hurried out. I didn't want to hear her make a monster out of him. As I was closing the door, I turned around and met my eyes with my son. It wasn't a child's look. It was a look of disgust and hatred, a look that made Daniel uncomfortable. For the next 10 years, wandering through other people's apartments, lounging in other people's beds, he remembered Mason's deep eyes. All the happy moments of his life were poisoned by that look. Daniel returned in Abigail's downy feather beds. He was stuffy and heavy. Oh, life! He longed to return to his native village. He thought he'd finally find peace and serenity. But what happened? While I was remembering, I got so excited that I couldn't sleep at once. Lucy was alone with her troubles. There was only enough money in her purse for one trip to the store. Her mother-in-law, a complete stranger, had never helped her and Daniel's family in anything. She only taught them and demanded help from her son. Lucy recalled how on her grandson's birthday, the old woman sat at the table with tight lips. She ate the food with her daughter-in-law's pleasure, but never once praised the treats. As a gift to her grandson, she brought a 100-year-old yellowed piece of cloth. That's what kind of material used to be. It's unbelievable. 10 years in the trunk, and as if it was bought yesterday. On Lucy, you can make a shirt for your little boy. And with a proud look she gave the gift. Lucy couldn't remember any other gifts from her mother-in-law. Now that Daniel had left her and Mason to fend for themselves, the old woman was beginning to slander her daughter-in-law. What could she expect from an orphan? She's a promiscuous girl. She was like that when she was young, and they probably kicked her out of town to the country. Who would want her in town? "Come on, you're lying," said the kind-hearted neighbor. She was a clever girl, beautiful, until they got into trouble. And your son left her with an invalid child. And he's an invalid because of his mother. How come? How do we know what she did to him? Maybe she's pregnant. What'd she do to keep from giving birth? Maybe he's not Daniel Mason. "Oh, I think you're a witch, Betty," the neighbor used to say in her heart. "You've been like that all your life, and you've gone completely mad in your old age. You are slandering your daughter-in-law, but she's a hard worker, Modest, and what a vegetable garden she has. Look, cleanliness and order everywhere. What order is there? It was only Daniel who kept everything in order. The old woman was bent. Why don't you tell me how she used to come to your house and scrape out all the dirt? All the years she cleaned your house silly, she wanted to please you. I don't have a mother of my own," says Aunt Molly. "It's not hard for me to help Mother Daniel. She's ill. But you're shameless, sitting there gossiping. Aren't you afraid of God? Betty has quarreled with her friends and is alone. Her daughter-in-law is now her first enemy. Her grandson doesn't go, and her favorite only son, the beauty and pride of his mother, has left. And that's it." The old woman became ill often, and then she collapsed. Lucy, no matter how kind her heart was, could not take care of her mother-in-law. She was left completely without means of subsistence, what to speak of the treatment of her son. Day and night, Exhausted woman's brain was looking for a way out. What to do? How to earn at least a living? While it was summer, she and Mason saved the vegetable garden, lost weight, but did not starve. Lucy, can't you go to your place? Asked her Grandma Clara, worried about her neighbor. No way, Mrs. Klaga. Who's going to let me? I don't even have sick leave. They can't keep me on sick leave for years. There's a good woman working there too. She has a family to feed too. So she probably has all the healthy foreheads in her family. Granny was angry. And she has a husband. And you're all alone. I'd sit with Mason while I'm still crawling, thank God. No, a library education wouldn't help, and it would be impossible to leave my son at home and sit in a half-empty library all day. Baba Clara, of course, is a human being, but you should see how hard she carries her soul disfigured by hard work. She has blood pressure, a bunch of other illnesses, and what kind of salary is a librarian? There's no more work in the village, a school and a nurse's station, neither of which suits her. And there are no vacancies. She can't go to the collective farm. The collective farm has ceased to exist. The world has changed. Life has become much more complicated over the years. Lucy is still only 28, and she feels like an old woman with only one joy, her son. He's growing up smart, reading, drawing. How much has he suffered in the hospital? But he hasn't lost his kindness. Soon it will be too small for him. Mom, why are you so sad? No, son, I'm fine. I'm just thinking. About what? I'm thinking about how we're going to live our lives. Mom, you'll figure it out. You're the smart one. And he reaches for his mother to hug and kiss him. Oh my God! Lucy prayed at night. Lord, show me the way to cure my son, to get him back on his feet. Help me, Lord. I'll do anything. I'll bear anything. Just give me a chance. Open the door for me. Blessed is he who believes. On a clear August afternoon, into the hands of Lucy, desperate to the last degree, the letter carrier handed a letter. From Margaret. Lucy gasped. Mommy, who is Margaret? Asked Mason. Oh, Mason, this is my very, very soulful friend. An orphan? Mason loved his mother's stories about her childhood. Yes, from an orphanage. Lucy hastily opened the letter and began to read. My dear friend, Margaret wrote, I'm writing to you from far away. How did I get here? It's a long story. I've been here for 3 years. I came for the money, but I think I'll stay here. You and I always dreamed of having a house, a bunch of kids, a family. So I decided to make that dream come true, to earn money to buy my own house. I didn't get an education. I knew I'd have to work wherever he put me. I was ready for anything, but I didn't think money would be so hard to come by. Yeah, the pay's pretty good here. If you live frugally, you can easily buy a house in this time. But I don't want a house anymore, Lucy. I don't want anything because I'm never going to have a bunch of kids or a family. I met a nice guy, local. We got close. We were going to get married. He worked as a foreman for loggers, and loggers here are mostly ex-convicts. It's a remote area, you know. They respected my Eric. I won't say anything bad about the laborers, but once 2 of them got drunk and started fighting, pulling out knives. Mine doesn't tolerate such things. At the workplace in the middle of the taiga, it's not allowed. So he went to break them up, even though they were angry mad. They didn't mean to. I believe they meant no harm. Yes, but one of them, in a fever, went right through my Eric's neck. How can you save him? I was pregnant at the time. Trouble doesn't come alone. I turned black with grief. I lost my little girl. The doctors said no more children. There's no reason for me to go to the big land now. Here at least I can visit Eric's grave, but there I have nothing. Lucy, my dear friend, you're all I have left. If you had only come to visit, I would have showered you with flowers, my friend." Lucy read the letter and tears rolled down her face. She remembered the sweet smile of Margaret, the red head, her laughter. She remembered her parents who had died in a car accident. For Lucy, she became a guide to the life beyond the gates. After all, Lucy herself knew nothing about normal families. Margaret recalled, Lucy felt with her a part of life before. Before the accident, before the orphanage, before she taught Lucy to dream, together they made plans. Margaret's future was determined when a gymnastics coach noticed her. The training camps and practices began. She was prophesied a good sports future, but a minor injury prevented her from continuing gymnastics. It happens, one little thing changes the whole fate. It happened after the girls graduated from the orphanage. Margaret had to go to the factory because it had a dormitory. She regretfully said goodbye to her sports career. Lucy, by that time, had already finished her studies at the local library technical school, and after that she was sent to the village. In the beginning their correspondence was lively, then went everyday life, cares, and troubles. In difficult moments, Lucy always turned to her friend, of course, in her thoughts. And strangely enough, it helped her. She pictured Margaret's freckled face and asked her advice. The answer always came. And here was a letter from the only person Lucy could call a family member, a friend, a sister who would never let her down. A crazy thought arose in her head and began to take real shape, a plan for the future. All night long she had been putting everything in its place. In the morning, despite the sleepless night, Lucy got up cheerful and determined. The task ahead was even more difficult. It required an effort that even she had never had to make before. "Baba Clara, give me some advice," said she to a neighbor who had dropped in to visit Mason's pet, out of habit. Looking at her pale face, the neighbor realized that the matter was serious. Mason was sent to the yard to play with the kittens. There was nothing to burden the child with unnecessary talk. "Oh, you poor thing," sighed the old woman, having heard Lucy's account. "I would with great joy left my dove, my Mason, but how? We'll have to live apart. You and Sodes will not allow that you." Lucy looked at her grandmother with regret. "It's not easy, you need a lot of documents from them. I'll give you money for the trip, Lucy, I will. I'll have money for the funeral, but I don't need it. Maybe I'll live to see you again. My parents were long-lived," smiled Baba Slaga. "I'll see you, Baba Slaga, I promise you. I'll pay you back the money from the first paycheck." She hugged her old friend and cried. "Why are you crying? You should be happy," grumbled the old woman. "You have such hope. That's what hope is. He will put you to work, support you for the first time, and Mason, suddenly, it will be good there with the doctors." At these words, Grandma Clara did not notice how she took out a huge handkerchief to hide her tears. She began to blow her nose noisily. Now the hardest thing is to explain to the child what and how. "Oh, it won't be easy, Lucy." "I don't know how it will be solved, Baba Clara." Lucy sighed. "It's all right. He's a boy, a sensible man, a kind soul like yours, and there's no one between you. You're the closest people to each other. You'll understand each other." "And what about the house, Baba Clara?" Lucy asked. "It's not good for it to be empty. It's not good to sell it either. My son, it should not remain homeless, and I will not have time before the frost. And you, Lucy." Clara's on a roll. "You go to the school principal first, and also to Benjamin, our former chairman. They are experienced people. They will help you. Every year, some of the young people come to the village to work, and they'll settle them in your house. It's warm and the place is good. That would be very good, Mrs. Clara. I don't need money, just as long as the house is reviewed. And so it was agreed. The conversation with the son was difficult, but Mason accepted his mother's decision surprisingly calmly. Mason, do you want to walk like before? Mom asked. I do. Her son looked her straight in the eye. But we cannot go to the treatment. We have no money. Would you agree to wait until I earn money to live without me? At Granny Clara's? Mason smiled. No, honey. Granny Slogga wouldn't be allowed to take you. And she's not in good health. She can't take you to the hospital to town. She can't. Mason sighed. What if you stay at the boarding school where there are doctors? With the same kids for a while I earn money. There's tutors, different clubs, schools there too. Like in your orphanage? Mason raised his eyes to his mother. Like in my orphanage. Lucy nodded her head. And you'll make friends there. Mason spent almost 3 years in a center for children like him while his mother worked up north. Just as Lucy had been told earlier by the social worker, the internet was very good indeed. The social worker, an elderly woman, had been offering her the place for a long time. Realizing how hard it is for a single woman with a disabled child, you made the right decision, Lucy. She reassured her. There is a very good team of teachers. Doctors are attached to sick children. How long will it take to collect the documents? Lucy was worried about something else. No. This procedure has been worked out for a long time. You can't imagine how many parents of disabled children find themselves in a difficult life situation. That's why we process everything according to the data we have. The registration of Mason was quick. And now, they are already saying goodbye at the door of the local school, as the boarding school was called in the city. I'll sing you a song every night, just like at home, do you hear, Mason? Wherever I am. Now I'll get in a wagon and go far away. I'll go a long, long way. But every night when you go to bed, I'll sing for you. You listen and you'll hear it. And when will you come, Mama? Mason tried very hard not to cry. Son, I'll write to you every week. How much more money do you need to start walking? As soon as I get the money I need, I'll come right over. 2 hearts were torn apart. How do I get to her? How long is the train? How to dress so as not to get into trouble at this time of year? About all these things, Margaret wrote in her letter. Lucy didn't even bother to reply to her friend. Instead, she only sped up her actions. And so she was on her way to the unknown, for the first time in her life to a faraway place. Margaret could not meet her, unaware of her friend's decision. Lucy herself had to settle down in a gray town surrounded by mighty taiga bounties, the best earnings we have at the logging operations. Her traveling companion cheerfully told her, happily eating fried fish bought at the station. The work is hard, but don't go to the librarians. It's the same petty pay as in the big land, not even enough for clothes. I don't even have clothes that fit. Lucy was afraid. The woman laughed. Fool, so there in overalls and tools, all issued. Yes, such overalls, that nowhere else you will not find such warm good. A good-natured compartment neighbor explained a lot of things to the inexperienced girl, saying goodbye fussed. And you remembered my address, or what if you can't find your friend, where to at night? Look, that's where I live. If you ask for my name and surname, anyone will show you. And she showed me the street leading away from the station. And Lucy had to look for a new acquaintance in the dark night. While she was waiting for the bosses, while she was being registered for work, for the unknown position of a lopper, it got dark. What dormitory? The boss, a fat man of imposing proportions, was surprised. We only have a tent city here. Don't you see there are almost no real houses? You can count them on your fingers, but in the forest, yes, there is comfort. You'll live in a cozy wagon there, young lady. Let's get your overalls in the morning, and then we'll take a lumber truck to the place. Yes, don't worry, people live here too, not wolves. And he laughed loudly at his joke. Lucy returned back to the station, from where she went down the street indicated, to the place where there were real, according to the cheerful chief houses. The guest was received cheerfully, fed, put to bed. In the morning, sitting in the high cabin of the car, Lucy gazed into the faintly lightening distance. She was not a coward, but she did not feel heroic. Only ashamedly thought that yesterday she had missed the evening treatment. Before going to bed, closing her eyes, she had sung a song to her son to herself, but fatigue had plunged her into sleep earlier. So not without the help of new friends, Lucy began to work in the taiga. In her naivety, she thought to see her friend here on the first day. If only she knew how many 1,000 people were cutting wood and chopping off limbs, stacking huge logs on more loads. So far spread the lands of this timber farm that Margaret, she met only thanks to the word-of-mouth radio, through many fellow travelers, sending her greetings. All the more joyful was their meeting. "Come on, Lucy, I'll talk to you, so that you can be transferred to us," Margaret said. "Everyone knows me. I'll talk Charles into it." Charles was the name of the bulky boss who'd hired Lucy. "He'll fight, of course." Margaret smiled. "He'll say, 'You can drop your lady stuff,' but he can also transfer, he's Sutton. And Lucy is already used to her brigade." "No, Margaret," she answered. "My take care of me, do not laugh at me, patiently teach me everything, as I am now from them at once, only to a friend under the wing got. I'll stay at my place. Now we'll be near each other. I'll see you." The work was hard. The day was like another day. My hands fell off by evening. The frost dried my cheeks and tore my lungs. In summer, mosquitoes and nuss, the heavy, hot cedar spirit. People tried to take fewer days off so that they could work and go to the land sooner. Someone strived to earn money and chased the intended amount, but only few people succeeded. In 3 years of hard labor, Lucy had aged 10 years. Every once in a while, she looked in the mirror and was horrified. Would Mason recognize me? She wrote to him every week, received cute drawings, then letters from her son. In spite of her age and ailments, Grandma Clara visited her favorite boy at the boarding school several times. There was a bus to the city. That comforted Lucy a little. "I owe my whole life to Baba Slaga," she told her new colleagues. Especially she became close to an elderly woman, Camille, who arrived in place of the cook who had gone home. It would be more accurate to say that the old woman was very insistently asked to work. She had long been retired, agreed only out of respect for the past merits of the boss, if humanity can be considered a merit. She agreed, Camille, to replace the cook who had left for a while until someone new arrived. Her health had been compromised by years of living in these parts and hard work. Since she and Lucy lived in the same trailer, there was no end to their conversations. Camille was attractive in her modesty and simplicity and could give good advice. She had lived in this area for many years. "How did you get here, Camille?" It was a question that excited Lucy very much. "I was a romantic girl," she told Lucy. "A gymnasium girl of the type who fell in love with a man to death, and he went to prison. He did time, and after his sentence, he was exiled here." "What did he put you in prison for?" Lucy asked. "Surely you couldn't love a thief or a murderer." "Don't be silly, child." Camille dismissed him. "He was a man of noble blood, a lawyer by education, from a fine family, father a professor, mother brought up children." She fulfilled the true purpose of a woman, mind you. Oh my! Lucy was surprised. So what happened? Human meanness. My lover had a friend whom everyone knew and loved. Sebastian trusted him without measure. They worked in the same department, positions of almost equal importance. It was necessary for this friend, somewhere in the corridors of power, to hear that Sebastian is prophesied in the chief's promotion, so he is prepared. He was a noble man. His honesty was noble. Why not take it up a notch? But suddenly he was angry. Why Sebastian, not him, was being promoted? So he wrote a denunciation. Was a mere denunciation believed and imprisoned? Lucy was horrified. The time, Lucy, was such that for any sneeze in the direction of the revered portrait could be imprisoned or shot, and no one would even know about the shooting. How did you find out about it? This friend was never promoted anyway. In time, he bitterly regretted what he'd done. He didn't think that Sebastian would die here, and soon that man's wife was also taken on the workers' complaint. She was a doctor and of undesirable nationality, and his friend loved his wife. Childless, he was going crazy with loneliness, and his conscience must have tormented him too. He left the confession, entrusted it to a trustworthy person, and then he took his own life. He knew his wife would never come back. What kind of man is he? Lucy was outraged. He took the life and happiness of so many people, and himself too. My husband is the same, and I'm sure he won't be happy either. What did he do? Is he the reason you're here? Camille asked. Because of him. Lucy sighed. If he had been a faithful man, honest, he would not have left me and my son without money. How did you decide to go to such a terrible place? You're an educated girl. You could work a little. You'd have enough for bread and potatoes. Lucy told the old woman her story without hiding or embellishing anything. At the end of the story, tears spurted from her eyes. Poor girl, said Camille, holding Lucy's head against her chest. You are a hero. Yes, for the sake of a beloved creature one would do anything. If only I could bring Sebastian back. But life is short. It's been many years since he died, and here I am, needy and lonely. Be strong, Lucy. Since then, Camille had been discreetly patronizing Lucy. So, kind, though seemingly stern, she was always making sure Lucy dried her clothes, tucking in better pieces of food in the dining room. She knew Lucy wasn't just making money, she was saving her son. Soon, a new cook arrived for their job, and Camille said a warm goodbye to everyone and departed for the town where she had a tiny room. A month later, an old woman suddenly came to Lucy's brigade again, waited until lunchtime, called her over to her, and, unnoticed by the others, showed her the corner of a puffy envelope. Here's the money, she said in a low voice. Lucy wanted to say something, but the old woman signally ordered her to be silent, quiet, and they killed for less. There are all sorts of people here, God forbid, and don't even think of refusing. I have no relatives. I'm going to die soon. They'll scatter like crows anyway, and you'll have a job to do. Go away, save your son and yourself. No one has ever taken good health away from here. How old do you think I am? 100 years old? I just turned 70. There was enough money to do 3 Mason surgeries. Lucy took the money and left. My son had the surgery, and he started walking. Restoring mobility was a long and difficult task, and it required a lot of money. It was only Camille's gift that made this miracle possible. Mason worked with the best physiotherapists, practiced physical therapy, and constantly strengthened his legs. And a year later, Lucy returned to the distant Tega town and took Camille to herself. The old woman cried, almost kissed her hands, saying that she had acquired a family. She had grown old, but she kept her activity and lively mind. So the three of them lived together. Camille worked hard in the vegetable garden, helped Lucy a lot around the house. It seemed there was no skill she didn't possess. Babs, Camille, where did you learn to do that? Mason wondered, munching crisply on her baked waddles. At Granny Clara's, and they're not so tasty. But don't tell her that, she'll be offended. Camille and Mason looked at each other conspiratorially and giggled. Both old women had a temper, but their age, their shared memories of the past, kept them close friends. They often posed on the bench, one big as a bear, the other small, dry gray knot on the top of her head. Nothing of Lucy's past life in the village, of course, was recognized. The old women were silent as partisans. Lucy made a pie in the morning. While she was making the paste, preparing the filling, the sun rose quite high. "I'll be ready in time for lunch," said Lucy, and began to heat the oven. At that time, a dog barked in the yard. Lucy came out and was stunned to see Daniel standing on the other side of the gate. He was smiling at his ex-wife as if nothing had happened. Following her mother and Mason went outside to see who it was. The dog didn't usually bark at his own, so it must be someone else. Lucy walked to the wicket gate, throwing to her son on the way. "Mason, get away from the sin." The son walked slowly toward the house. Lucy did not look in his direction. Her heart was tearing out of her chest. The hated man stood on the other side of the fence and smirked. He hadn't changed much even in those 10 years, only became, as if shallower, uncasey, and maybe now the ex-wife saw him with different eyes. "Why did you come?" Coldly, Lucy asked him. "Go where you came from. There's nothing of yours here." "I didn't come here to demand anything." The smile slowly fell off Daniel's face. "I came back to check on you. We're not strangers. What are you doing here?" "Your money's gone." "I took it all. I didn't even leave any money for my son's medicine." Daniel, of course, didn't expect a warm welcome, but it was the first time he'd seen Lucy so angry. He's her lawful husband. She could still behave more decently. He decided to take offense. "Why did you do that?" "But it turned out so. But I came back, and you're not happy." "Daniel, are you serious? After all these years, after what you did, you think you can just come back? I know you're single, so you were waiting. For you?" "Waiting?" Lucy even choked with indignation. How insolent is he? It disgusted her to look at his fat face. "What did I do?" "What? I ask you. You live happily, everything is fine, and then this is my house too. You a shoal." The woman barely restrained her anger not to attack her ex-husband with fists. "Go away." "What shared house? You stole the money that was prepared for the child's operation. You left us in a position we wouldn't wish on an enemy. You haven't paid a dime of child support. How can you even say that?" Suddenly, Lucy saw Mason standing next to her. He had a shotgun in his hand. The guy threw it down and aimed it at Daniel and said, "Go away, and don't ever come near our house." Daniel turned pale, but then pulled himself together, remained standing where he was. Then he swallowed and said through the force of it, "What are you threatening me?" "Not a fool to shoot, who will spoil his life young. Go away when adults are talking." Lucy, terrified, rushed between father and son, but Mason stepped around her and took aim again. Daniel, not noticing Mason's movements, stepped from foot to foot. He was pleased with himself. It wasn't the kind of reception he'd been expecting, of course, but he wouldn't just walk away. Not noticing the hatred of his wife and son looking at him from the other side of the fence, he said cheekily, At least pay compensation for my half. Oh, he could use even a little money now. Miranda threw him out, as they say, without severance pay. Where's he going to go now? All he could do was to get his way, to squeeze some money out of these poor people. Daniel looked up and saw Lucy trying to take the gun away from Mason. To tell the truth, he was afraid that a stray bullet would fly out, and then all his dreams would be over. But then an old lady appeared next to Mason and Lucy, as if from under the ground. She gently took the gun from Mason's hands. "Don't do it, grandson. He's right. Why would you ruin your life? For something like this. You got everything to look forward to, but I got nothing to lose." And Camille very professionally dropped the double-barreled shotgun. Daniel, despite his fear, even laughed. What a scene! Her graying head barely sticking out of the ground, but she grabbed the gun with her bony hands instantly and pointed it at him. What a laugh! Daniel heard the old woman's creaky voice. "Do you know your name?" "Daniel Wright?" "Well, I was the best hunter in my time. No man could compare to me, and I wouldn't miss a boar like that." The first shot went in the air. Daniel jumped with surprise. His desperate fear came back to him. With a mocking smile, looking at him, Baba Camille said, "The second shot is usually at the knee." And she began to slowly lower the gun down. Daniel was gripped by panic. Such an iron button could put a bullet in his knee. He didn't remember how he shrieked all over the street. "I'm going to jail. I'll put you all in jail." He turned and ran, away from the Dan house. Then he stopped for a moment, turned around, shook his fist. Anything he might have expected, but not such a reception. But people, and you came to them with all your soul. As to your relatives, in fact, they are his closest people, and they... A shot rang out again, and a small fountain of pebbles and sand appeared under the man's feet. Daniel shrieked and ran. Turning down another street, he stopped to catch his breath. What to do now? Nothing good had come of his attempt. He would not be able to use his wife's services as he had done 10 years ago, and live happily in a free apartment. As he now called it on Miranda, his former home, his home too. The thought hit Daniel's brain like a red rag on an angry bull. "I will," he repeated, again strengthening himself in his hatred for his ex, his wife and son. Knowing his goal, he walked confidently toward the police station, which was located where he had been in previous years. Before opening the doors of the police station, Daniel shook himself off, breathed and gathered his strength, and then he shook himself back to his former indignant state and stepped inside with determination. "Hello, who can I complain to here? I was just almost shot outside my own house." And the freckled boy in a police uniform, sitting behind the window of the duty officer, looked at him indifferently and lazily said, "Come on, there have never been any murders in our village. But come with me now, I'll show you who shoots at the feet of peaceful people and threatens to shoot them to death. Who attempted to kill you, citizen? The old woman's crazy. She belongs in a mental institution. She might shoot someone else. So what? Does she have the rifle?" The officer on duty asked with a sneer. "A hunting rifle. And rest assured, she handles it like a pro." Daniel, at the memory of the accurate shots, was again seized by an unpleasant feeling of threat to his life. "Show me your papers as a citizen." Daniel took out a passport from his inside jacket pocket. "Ah, so you're Mason's absconding father?" the policeman asked. "I see a familiar face. I remembered you. You worked as an electrician when I was still in school." He didn't look happy to be recognized. Daniel was forced to write a statement, and at the duty officer's request, he rewrote it 5 times. There was even a suspicion whether it was done on purpose. But the freckles of the young officer on duty looked completely serious. So Daniel resigned himself to rewriting it. "We will take all measures, citizen of the victim." The policeman reported, for some reason, without calling Daniel by his surname. Did he dislike the surname or what? Daniel sighed and quietly went back to Abigail. Maybe his sister wouldn't say no to another sleepover while the police dealt with the assassination case. Daniel wasn't going to let it go. At least let them compensate him for the moral damage. They must have plenty of money. Lucy had built a house in his yard, by the way. Tomorrow morning he'll go back to the police station. He'll get what he wants. He should have threatened to go further, to the prosecutor, if anything. The police couldn't find any weapons, and they weren't looking for any. All the neighbors confirmed that they were outside at the time, and they didn't see anything like what Daniel wrote in his statement. He never showed up in Lucy and Mason's lives again.